Chapter 79. The disheveled old man's retort nearly caused Feng Haoyu to choke to death. This was clearly acting shamelessly and being unreasonable, coupled with the fact that he was the master of weapon peak. No matter how indignant Feng Haoyu was, he could not say anything and could only swallow his anger. Under the envious gazes of the disciples, the disheveled old man led Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu into the inner hall. The inner hall wasn't big and was only dozens of square meters. There were about 1,000 jade scrolls hung on the four walls. Among them, only about 100 of them were shiny while most of them were dim. The disheveled old man pointed to the jade scrolls on the wall. These are the images left behind by all the weapon refinement masters since the establishment of Misty Peak. The 100-odd jade scrolls contain images of successful spirit weapons while the rest are images of failures. However, they were all created by weapon refinement masters as well. The two of you can choose 10 of them to view. Although there seemed to be a lot of jade scrolls, Ethereal Sect had been around for thousands of years. However, there were only 1,000 jade scrolls left behind and most of them were images of failures. Without thinking much, Feng Haoyu chose 10 shiny jade scrolls right away. Those were all images of successful spirit weapon refinements. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo chose 5 bright and 5 dim jade scrolls. To Su Zimo, while there were benefits to being successful, there were also benefits to being able to view the images of weapon refinement masters' failures. At the very least, he could avoid making similar mistakes. When he saw that, the disheveled old man nodded to himself. It was difficult for a weapon refinement master to replicate the success of others. However, they could avoid similar failures. That was a form of wisdom. Holding the 10 jade scrolls, Su Zimo assumed a lotus position and injected spirit chi into them. The patterns on the scrolls shone brightly as a clear image entered his vision. Immersed in it, Su Zimo's understanding of weapon refinement deepened and many of the doubts in his heart were resolved. In the blink of an eye, a day and night passed. Feng Haoyu stood up and returned the 10 jade scrolls. Glancing at Su Zimo, who was still comprehending, he left the weapon refinement hall. Before long, Su Zimo stood up and returned the jade scrolls as well. How was it? You've gained quite a bit, right? The disheveled old man asked with a smile. Su Zimo nodded and pondered for a moment before asking, I do have some insights for the first 4 steps of weapon refinement. However, I still don't know how to do it for spirit gathering. The difficulty of spirit gathering is in spirit chi. Initially, the spirit chi within the materials are relatively stable. However, after fusion and refinement, the structure of the flying sword is formed will be refined. It's as difficult as ascending the heavens if you want to infuse the spirit chi back into the flying sword. In addition, the flying sword has been burned to a crimson state. If there is any conflict, it will immediately explode. The disheveled old man sighed softly. Sigh, you're not the only one. Even advanced weapon refinement masters wouldn't dare to claim a 100% success rate for spirit gathering. Most of it is a kind of spiritual perception that has been cultivated through years of refining artifacts. When Su, the disheveled old chi, is spirit? Through the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness and his life and death experiences, Su Zimo had already cultivated a spirit perception. However, could it be used for spirit gathering? Su Zimo's mind was stirred as he pondered about how he should put in more effort in that direction. Head back first. If you have any questions, you can look for me here at any time. With that said, the disheveled old man pointed to the jade scrolls on the wall and winked at Su Zimo. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he understood the disheveled old man's intentions. The disheveled old man was hinting to Su Zimo that if he were to look for him here, he could naturally take the opportunity to look at the jade scrolls on the wall. Thank you, master. Su Zimo's heart warmed as he bowed. The moment he walked out of the weapon refinement hall, Su Zimo caught sight of someone at the entrance. Feng Haoyu. It was as though he had been waiting for a long time. Su Zimo frowned slightly. Just as he was about to summon his flying sword and return to his cave abode, Feng Haoyu turned around slowly and raised his head, reaching out to block Su Zimo's path. What's the matter? Su Zimo was annoyed at the way this person's nose was pointed at the sky. Feng Haoyu replied indifferently, At the end of this year, I want to create history in Ethereal Sect by pointing my sword at the number 1 of the 3 peaks, including Weapon Peak. Junior brother Su, you're someone who understands the situation and should know what to do. I really don't know. Su Zimo shook his head expressionlessly. Are you challenging me? Feng Haoyu narrowed his eyes and released the spirit qi of level 7 qi condensation, causing a cold gust of wind to blow around him. You're sick. Su Zimo scoffed coldly and soared into the air on his flying sword. In the blink of an eye, he left the weapon refinement hall and disappeared from Feng Haoyu's sight. After returning to his cave abode, Su Zimo sat on his bed and slowly digested the contents of the 10 jade scrolls. Before long, there was a series of hurried knocks on the door. Bro, it's me. Little Fatty's voice sounded. After not seeing him for a month, Little Fatty had also cultivated to level 6 qi condensation. The cultivation speed of a heaven spirit root was truly shocking. Before the end of the year, Feng Haoyu, Lung Ro and Little Fatty could all reach level 9 qi condensation, or even perfected qi condensation. Bro, I heard that you have a feud with Feng Haoyu? Little Fatty asked right away. Su Zimo asked, you know about this too? It's not just me. This matter has already spread throughout the 5 peaks and many disciples are discussing it. Little Fatty sighed. Bro, you're being a little irrational. He cultivates his and I cultivate mine. What's the difference? Su Zimo did not mind and chuckled casually. It's not that simple. Little Fatty continued. In the sect, disciples are forbidden from killing each other. Even if he challenges you, you can reject him. But it's different outside of the sect. Bro, you can't possibly stay in the sect forever, right? Most of the sect missions require you to head out. Now that Feng Haoyu has gathered many disciples around him, he'll definitely find trouble with you the moment you head out of the sect. Su Zimo raised his brow and did not say anything. Little Fatty continued, actually, given Feng Haoyu's potential, he'll definitely succeed in establishing his foundation after the 5 peaks face-off at the end of the year, and be promoted to an inner sect disciple. Bro, you can completely avoid him this time round and take part in the 5 peaks face-off next year. That way, you'll be doing him a favor. We'll talk about that later. Su Zimo did not express any opinion. Little Fatty nodded. No matter what, I'm on your side, bro. If there's anything you can use me for, feel free to let me know. Alright, Su Zimo smiled. The two of them chatted for a while more before Little Fatty left. Su Zimo stood silently in his cave abode for a while, intending to leave the sect and head down the mountain. Su Zimo was a little anxious after making no progress in the marrow cleansing section for the past month. Back when he was cultivating the bovine-tongued saber, Su Zimo had comprehended the essence of it through the scene of a yellow cow eating grass. After leaving the sect this time round, Su Zimo intended to catch a tiger or leopard in the forest near the sect to study them carefully. Chapter 80. Ever since he entered the sect, Su Zimo had not left the sect nor had he taken on any missions. Now that he was going to leave the sect, Su Zimo intended to take on a mission and complete it so that he could earn some contribution points for the sect as well. Arriving at the mission stele of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo raised his head and looked over. The mission stele was split into 2 sections. The upper section was for the missions of the 5 peaks and disciples of the 5 peaks could accept them. The lower section was for Weapon Peak disciples and was specially designed for them. The higher the difficulty of the missions, the more contribution points they would be rewarded. Great Rock Forest. It was a place dozens of miles northwest of Misty Peak where pure gold ore was produced. It was an important spirit material for refining flying swords. The mission to search for the spirit material wasn't too difficult. However, the location of the mission was in Great Rock Forest and the difficulty increased exponentially. In fact, it was quite dangerous as well. As long as it was a forest, there would definitely be birds and beasts. At the periphery of the forest, there were mostly wild beasts or weak spirit beasts. However, the deeper one went into the forest, the stronger the spirit beasts would be. In fact, there might even be spirit demons in the core region. Once targeted by a spirit demon, even Foundation establishment cultivators would not dare to escape unscathed. And this pure gold ore mine was located in the core region of Great Rock Forest. This was a mission of Weapon Peak and it had been on the mission stele for some time now without anyone daring to take it on. Great Rock Forest was the closest forest to Ethereal Sect. Initially, Su Zimo had intended to head there as well and thus took on the mission. There was a sleepy old man next to the mission submission desk. Su Zimo found out from Shui that this was one of the 3 elders of Weapon Peak, Elder Lu. The three elders of Weapon Peak were the disheveled old man, the gatekeeper of the spirit weapon chamber, Elder Li, and this Elder Lu. In order to be conferred the title of Elder in Misty Peak, one had to be at the level of Jean Dan. Su Zimo came before Elder Lu and handed over his sect badge. Raising his head, Elder Lu frowned and tossed Su Zimo's sect badge back casually, barking coldly, "You're not allowed to go." "Why?" Su Zimo asked. Elder Lu rolled his strange eyes and said, "Kid, are you stupid? You're only at the 5th level of Qi condensation. Are you going to the Great Rock Forest to die? Even perfected Qi refinement warriors have to team up for this mission. I'm just going to take a look. If there's any danger, I'll definitely leave." Su Zimo smiled. In truth, even though Great Rock Forest was dangerous, it was not too difficult for Su Zimo, who possessed spirit perception. "If you really encounter danger, do you think you can run away?" Elder Lu curled his lips and said, "Look at your small body. Let me tell you, don't blame me for not warning you if you die outside." "Elder, don't worry. I'm a tough guy. I won't die." Su Zimo smiled. Elder Lu harumphed coldly and made a record. The mission on the mission stele dimmed, indicating that it had been accepted. Pondering for a moment, Elder Lu took out an intricate paper crane from his storage bag and handed it to Su Zimo. "This is the spirit messenger crane of the sect. If you encounter any danger, you can release this spirit crane." "Thank you, Elder." Su Zimo kept the spirit crane in his storage bag and cupped his fists before leaving Weapon Peak on his sword. Elder Lu closed his eyes and fell asleep again, muttering, "Juniors these days sure don't know their place." This was the first time Su Zimo left the sect after a month in the sect. Su Zimo took out the paper crane that Elder Lu gave him and took a look. Su Zimo had seen a paper crane as such once before. Back in the capital of Yen country, Su Zimo was chasing after the one-armed cultivator of Joyful Sect. That person had released a similar paper crane to send news back to the sect. There were mysterious patterns etched on the paper crane, and it could be activated by injecting spirit chi. Su Zimo could vaguely guess that the paper crane was actually a type of talisman. Keeping the paper crane, Su Zimo suddenly felt something and frowned. Someone was following him. Su Zimo scoffed coldly internally. If someone was following him the moment he left the sect, there was no doubt that it was an ethereal sect disciple. Could little fatty have been right? Is he trying to cause trouble for me outside? Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he pretended not to notice anything, and continued speeding in the direction of Great Rock Forest. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at the edge of Great Rock Forest. Along the way, Su Zimo could vaguely sense that there were 5 people following him, and the highest cultivation was even at level 9 Qi condensation. If these people were really sent by Feng Haoyu, he's truly taking me seriously. Su Zimo smiled and burrowed into the forest without hesitation. Entering the forest was akin to returning to Su Zimo's territory. Here no one was a match for Su Zimo. Su Zimo retracted his flying sword and sprinted left and right. Before long, he shook off the people behind him and arrived at a secluded spot. Taking off his green robes, he was topless. A series of crackling sounds could be heard from Su Zimo's body as his tendons and bones rang together. Instantly, he grew to a height of more than 2 meters. His flesh expanded and his muscles intertwined as his body expanded as well. The muscles on Su Zimo's face twitched and changed strangely. A moment later, his appearance changed drastically and he turned into a bare-chested burly man with a ferocious expression. After mastering the first 3 sections of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness, Su Zimo could change his appearance and appearance at will such that even his closest kin would not be able to recognize him. Su Zimo lowered his head and chuckled. In a flash, he disappeared from the spot once more. Senior Brother Zhou, where did Su Zimo go? Why did we lose him all of a sudden? If you ask me, we should have made a move earlier on. Where are we going to find that lad in Great Rock Forest? Shut up. Zhou Wei's expression darkened as he scolded softly. We were too close to the sect earlier on. How could we make a move? If the disciples of the sect saw us, we'll be punished when we return. Zhou Wei was a trial disciple of Spirit Peak, and was at level 9 Qi condensation. Initially, he was quite a figure in Spirit Peak. Unexpectedly, Feng Haoyu with a mutated spirit root and heaven-defying potential defeated him at level 7 Qi condensation. Zhou Wei was completely subdued by Feng Haoyu's strength. Even though Zhou Wei was the one who made the decision for this operation, it was with Feng Haoyu's tacit approval. Other than Zhou Wei, who was at level 9 Qi condensation, 2 of the other 4 were at level 7 and 8. That was enough to teach Su Zimo a lesson. Let's search carefully. Su Zimo is only at level 5 Qi condensation, so he can't have gone far. He's definitely at the periphery of Great Rock Forest, Zhou Wei analyzed calmly. A Spirit Peak disciple asked, "What if that lad ran into Great Rock Forest?" "That's great. That lad can't blame us if he gets eaten by the spirit beasts," Zhou Wei scoffed coldly. Another Spirit Peak disciple asked, "If we find Su Zimo, how are we going to deal with him?" A cold glint flashed through Zhou Wei's eyes as he replied sinisterly, "Between sect disciples, we can't cripple one another's cultivation. However, we can severely injure that lad so badly that he won't be able to get out of bed for a year. That way, he won't be able to participate in the Weapon Peak face-off at the end of the year." Chapter 81. On a towering ancient tree not far away, a burly man with a bare upper body was hidden in the thick leaves, overhearing the conversation between Zhou Wei and the rest clearly. A cold glint flashed through the burly man's eyes. A gust of wind blew past and the leaves rustled. The strong man slid down from the ancient tree. His movements were light, and he silently landed on the ground. He crouched down and used both his hands and feet to push through the grass, moving stealthily in the direction of Zhou Wei and the others. The grass that was half a man's height hid the burly man's figure perfectly. Looking down, one would only feel the grass and trees swaying gently as though a gust of wind had blown past. A thin line glided on the ground. It was impossible to tell that it was a person. "Senior brother Zhou, shall we split up and search?" "Think so too. That Su Zimo is only at level 5 Qi condensation. Any one of us can capture him easily." Zhou Wei nodded. "Let's do that. Everyone split up and search. What are you guys looking for?" The moment Zhou Wei said that, a hoarse voice with a hint of coldness sounded from behind him. For Qi refinement warriors, unless absolutely necessary, they would not fly too far even if they use sword kinesis flight, at most 2 to 3 meters. The higher the distance, the more spirit Qi they would expend. At that moment behind Zhou Wei, a burly man with a bare upper body stood up. He was more than 2 meters tall and his muscles were as hard as rocks, filled with explosive power. It was as though a deity had suddenly descended with a murderous expression. Instantly, Zhou Wei was scared out of his wits. He did not realize that someone was approaching him. Suddenly, the burly man reached out and grabbed Zhou Wei's ankle, dragging him down. Right in front of the 4 Spirit Peak disciples, he slammed him onto the ground. Bang! There was a deafening sound. A human-shaped pit appeared on the ground. Zhou Wei, who was at level 9 Qi condensation, was like a 3-year-old baby in the hands of the burly man, unable to retaliate at all. Zhou Wei lay paralyzed in the huge pit, spitting out blood foam from his mouth. His eyes were rolled back, and half of the bones in his body were broken. His internal organs were shaken, and he fainted on the spot. Only his body was still twitching unconsciously. The burly man knocked Zhou Wei unconscious. In a flash, he appeared in front of the other 2 level 8 Qi refinement warriors. The 2 disciples of Spirit Peak were startled. Without hesitation, they wanted to leap into the air. But unexpectedly, the burly man's speed was even faster. With a leap, he directly pulled the 2 of them down from the air. Boom! Boom! It was the same scene again. The 2 Spirit Peak disciples were thrown to the ground by the burly man and fainted on the spot. Quick! The remaining 2 disciples of Spirit Peak were pale as they summoned their flying swords and pointed at the burly man. Their flying swords turned into a streak of light and arrived instantly. One of the flying swords pierced the muscular man's glabella, while the other pierced the muscular man's chest. They were both vital points. The burly man grinned maliciously. He didn't even try to dodge. Instead, he charged forward. When they saw that, the 2 Spirit Peak disciples heaved a sigh of relief. In the end, this mysterious burly man's spiritual wisdom had yet to be developed. He only had brute force, but he did not know the power of cultivation techniques. He did not even know how to dodge the flying sword. Clang! Clang! Close in, the flying sword struck the burly man's glabella and chest. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. The flying swords were repelled. Unharmed, the burly man charged forward to the two of them instead. Monster. One of the Spirit Peak disciples was so scared that his voice was trembling and his face was pale. In fact, he had even forgotten to escape. The other Spirit Peak disciple hurriedly controlled the flying sword beneath his feet to turn and flee. With a casual punch, the burly man sent the Spirit Peak disciple who was rooted to the spot flying. Sprinting on the ground, his legs crisscrossed, leaving afterimages as he caught up to the Spirit Peak disciple in a few steps. With a leap, the burly man leaped back and forth on a few towering ancient trees, increasing his height continuously. Come on down. The burly man burst into laughter and grabbed the person's calf, pulling him down from the skies. Snap! The person's calf was snapped on the spot by the burly man's grip. Ah! The person was in so much pain that he broke out in cold sweat and howled. Carrying the person, the burly man returned to his original spot and grabbed the remaining 4 people who had fainted. Carrying 3 in one hand and 2 in the other, he sprinted outside in huge strides. Who are you? We're disciples of Ethereal Sect. How dare you attack us? If the sect finds out about this, they won't let you off easily. The only disciple who was conscious was Guochong as he yelled at the burly man. The burly man did not say anything and merely continued to travel through the forest. Increasingly afraid, Guochong asked with a trembling voice, Where are you taking us? Hero, please let us go. Hero, I know my mistake. Suddenly, the burly man stopped in his tracks and lowered his head. Glaring at Guochong coldly, he asked coldly, What did you do wrong? Guochong was stunned by the question. He had merely blurted it out in a moment of desperation, and did not know what he did wrong. Guochong lamented internally. He did not know where this burly man came from, but he attacked without saying anything and was so strong that it was unreasonable. Their cultivation methods were completely useless against this burly man. After stopping in his tracks, the burly man tossed the 5 of them on the ground casually and turned to leave without saying anything. A look of disbelief appeared on Guochong's face. They survived? The burly man did not kill them. Guochong looked around. This was outside Great Rock Forest. For some reason, the burly man brought them out of Great Rock Forest and tossed them here casually before leaving just like that. May I know your name and which sect are you from, burly man? Guochong was indignant as he shouted once more. Stopping in his tracks, the burly man suddenly turned around and returned. Shuddering, Guochong wanted to slap himself a few times as he hurriedly said, Hero, I know my mistake this time round. I shouldn't have asked for your name. The burly man walked up to Guochong and the others and grabbed their storage bags. Opening them, he took out the spirit stones and elixirs inside, and put them all into his own storage bag. Looking at his storage bag that was almost emptied, Guochong wanted to cry but no tears came out. Snickering, the burly man turned and charged into Great Rock Forest, disappearing in the blink of an eye. With trembling hands, Guochong opened his storage bag slowly and took out a paper crane. Using his spirit chi, he wrote on it, We were attacked in Great Rock Forest. The enemy is strong and has a mysterious identity. Please send reinforcements to the sect. Injecting spirit chi, the spirit crane flapped its wings and flew, turning into a streak of light that disappeared into the void. Right now, he was injured and could not bring the 4 of them back. As such, he could only wait here for reinforcements from the sect. Looking at his 4 fellow sect mates who were still unconscious, Guochong was filled with sorrow. At the thought of how his savings over the past few years were swept clean by this mysterious burly man who appeared out of nowhere, Guochong could not help but howl, I'm innocent. Chapter 82. The mysterious burly man was naturally Su Zimo. Returning to Great Rock Forest, Su Zimo reverted to his original appearance and figure. Donning his green robes once more and returning to his scholarly appearance, he sped towards the center of Great Rock Forest on his flying sword. The reason why Su Zimo chose to change his appearance was also a decision he made after careful consideration. Although Zhou Wei and the other 4 were here to cause trouble for Su Zimo, it was difficult to explain things when they returned to the sect. If the 5 of them denied it, there was nothing he could do. If he severely injured the 5 of them, Su Zimo would be punished more easily. On the other hand, His melee combat strength was Su Zimo's trump card, and he did not want to expose it prematurely. Furthermore, only by changing his appearance and identity would he be able to smoothly loot all the spirit stones and elixirs in the 5 people's storage bags. No matter how wrong the 5 of them felt, they had no one to complain to. That was because there was no such person as the mysterious burly man in this world. Gradually entering the center of the forest, Su Zimo retracted his flying sword and landed on the ground. Danger was everywhere in the forest. Su Zimo's flying sword was not as agile as on the ground after all. If he encountered any danger, he could avoid it immediately. Along the way, Su Zimo sensed the auras of many spirit beasts. However, Su Zimo did not fight with those spirit beasts. Instead, he tried his best to avoid them and headed straight for the center of Great Rock Forest. Not far away there was a small stone forest. Pieces of pure gold ores were erected on the ground and shone brightly. Su Zimo snuck over carefully. Within the stone forest, Su Zimo sensed a dangerous aura. There must be an extremely strong spirit beast or a spirit demon residing here. In the center of the stone forest, beside a gigantic pure gold ore, a spirit beast covered in thick armor sprawled on the ground. Its armor shone with a cold metallic luster, and its thick tail was filled with spikes. Its head and limbs were covered in armor as well. A metal-devouring beast. It survived by devouring all sorts of spirit materials and ores. It had a cold temperament and was invulnerable to weapons. It was extremely strong and had almost no weaknesses. The metal-devouring beast before him was clearly about to cultivate to the realm of a spirit demon. It was a little tricky. Su Zimo frowned. If it was any other spirit beast, Su Zimo was confident that he could kill it. However, he had no idea how to deal with the metal-devouring beast. At this time, the sleeping metal-devouring beast suddenly opened its eyes. Its cold gaze fell on Su Zimo, bursting with killing intent. Roar! Suddenly, the metal-devouring beast stood up and roared in Su Zimo's direction, charging over. Su Zimo squinted his eyes and a cold glint flickered in his eyes. He exerted strength in his legs and executed the plow heaven stride. With a stomp, 2 gullies appeared on the ground and the soil was overturned. In the face of the metal-devouring beast's attack, Su Zimo did not retreat or evade. Instead, his aura increased. After plow heaven stride, he used mountain lean and pushed his entire body forward. Bang! A man and a beast crashed into each other. Su Zimo took half a step back, while metal-devouring beast was sent flying. It only stopped after smashing through several pieces of gold. Haha! Su Zimo laughed heartily. At this moment, Su Zimo realized that his physique had reached an extremely terrifying level, after being tempered by spirit chi, on the basis of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. Even the strength of the metal-devouring beast could not withstand his attack. A trace of panic flashed in the eyes of the metal-devouring beast. Su Zimo executed Divine Steed Fleeting, and appeared in front of the metal-devouring beast in an instant. He drew the cold moon saber from his storage bag and slashed at the metal-devouring beast's head. Clang! Sparks flew. The cold moon saber was deflected and the metal-devouring beast was unharmed. At the same time, the metal-devouring beast swung its thick tail that was covered with barbs and swept it across the air. It hit Su Zimo squarely in the chest. In a flash, Su Zimo executed the mental cultivation technique of petrification of flesh and blood. His flesh expanded and became as hard as stone. Bang! Su Zimo fell and slammed heavily into the largest pure gold rock, in the middle of the stone forest. Dense cracks appeared on the pure gold rock behind him. The metal-devouring beast looked at the pure gold rock behind Su Zimo with a nervous expression. Su Zimo rubbed his chest and returned the cold moon saber to his storage bag. The cold moon saber was useless against the metal-devouring beast. He could only rely on his physical strength to kill it here. The man and beast clashed once more. The metal-devouring beast opened its bloody mouth and bit towards Su Zimo's neck. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed the metal-devouring beast's upper and lower jaw, pulling it outwards with all his might. Pust! Su Zimo took a deep breath. Like an anaconda eating the sun, his chest puffed up and his arms expanded. Green veins popped on his arms and they crawled all over his arms like green snakes. It was a shocking sight. Open up! Su Zimo growled and tore with both hands. Shing! A blood mist filled the air as organs fell out and the stench of blood filled the air. The metal-devouring beast was torn into two by Su Zimo. Panting slightly, Su Zimo tossed the corpse of the metal-devouring beast to the ground and started collecting the pure gold rocks on the ground. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. A large piece of pure gold crystal appeared from the pile of shattered pure gold rocks. It was almost transparent and shone with a mysterious luster. Pure gold crystal! Su Zimo exclaimed. Pure gold crystal was a supreme-grade pure gold rock. It was extremely difficult to produce and was also an important material for forging middle-grade or even superior-grade spirit weapons. It was extremely rare. I've struck gold this time. Su Zimo's heart was burning with excitement as he hurriedly kept the pure gold crystal that was taller than a person into his storage bag. Su Zimo smashed all the other pure gold rocks, but he did not find any more. Even so, Su Zimo's gains from this trip had far exceeded his expectations. After collecting all the pure gold rocks, Su Zimo turned and left. Before long, a green-robed scholar appeared from Great Rock Forest with a linghu in his left hand and a spirit leopard in his right. At the same time, Guochang's spirit crane for help returned to Spirit Peak, causing quite a commotion. An elder of Spirit Peak personally led a group of inner sect disciples to Great Rock Forest. Weapon Peak. Bored, the disheveled old man was strolling around the peak. Arriving beside the mission stele, he raised his head and exclaimed softly, "Someone took the mission for Great Rock Forest? Which disciple of our Weapon Peak is so capable to head to Great Rock Forest?" Beside the stele, Elder Lu squinted his sleepy eyes and harumphed. "There's a level 5 chi condensation lad who doesn't know his place and ran off on his own. I was afraid that something would happen to him, so I even gave him a spirit crane." Level 5 chi condensation? Frowning, the disheveled old man seemed to have recalled something as he grabbed Elder Lu's wrist and asked, "What's that lad's name? I think he's called Su Zimo or something." Piak. The disheveled old man slammed his palm on the table heavily, scaring Elder Lu awake instantly. "Are you crazy? Why are you so flustered?" Elder Lu glared and scolded. "You're the one who's King crazy." The disheveled old man hollered. "That lad is the only person in Weapon Peak who managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. How dare you let him head to Great Rock Forest? I'll King kill you." "He's the lad who managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire?" Elder Lu was dumbfounded as well. The disheveled old man's face darkened as he hollered, "Sleep, sleep, sleep. All you know is to King sleep. That lad is the hope of Weapon Peak. If anything happens to him, I'll never let you off." Stunned for a moment, Elder Lu soared into the air hurriedly and urged, "Stop wasting time. Hurry to Great Rock Forest and save that lad." Chapter 83. In order to avoid Zhou Wei, Guochong and the others, Su Zimo took a detour and coincidentally avoided the disheveled old man and the elder of Spirit Peak as well. Returning to Weapon Peak, Su Zimo was about to hand in his mission when he realized that Elder Lu was nowhere to be found. "Where's Elder Lu?" Su Zimo asked a disciple of Weapon Peak who was passing by. "I'm not sure either. Earlier on, I saw Elder Lu arguing with Master for a bit before leaving in a hurry. I don't know where he went." The disciple shook his head as well. Su Zimo did not think too much about it as he brought Linghu and the spirit leopard back to his cave abode. The two spirit beasts had long gained sentience and were no different from humans. Now that they were brought into Su Zimo's cave abode, their eyes were filled with deep fear. As far as the two spirit beasts knew, even human cultivators were physically weak. However, this man before them had completely broken that norm. This man's physical strength was much stronger than theirs. Be it Linghu or the spirit leopard, neither of them knew why this man had brought them into this cave abode. Kill us for meat? Force us to swear a blood oath and enslave us? Or perhaps, Linghu shook his head as though he had recalled something. He looked at Su Zimo with a strange gaze and felt a chill run down his spine. Could this man have some sort of fetish? It's over. I've protected my chastity for so many years. Am I going to be? Linghu thought that he had guessed Su Zimo's intentions and was instantly disheartened. Linghu was indignant and looked at Su Zimo with a bitter gaze with a conflicted expression. Su Zimo felt goosebumps from Linghu's gaze and slapped him casually. "What's wrong with you?" Ling Hu felt even more wronged after being slapped by Su Zimo. It's over, it's over. Not only did he want to do me, he kept hitting me. For a moment Ling Hu's heart was filled with all sorts of emotions, and he was on the verge of tears. The spirit leopard stood at the side obediently without moving at all. However, there was a ferocious glint in its eyes from time to time. Su Zimo walked in front of the two spirit beasts and said in a deep voice, "You two make a sound." Ling Hu, the spirit leopard. Ling Hu thought to himself, this guy's taste is a little unique. He wants us to scream first and then do that. The spirit leopard did not dare to hesitate and barked softly. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's and was far from the earth-shaking roars of the spirit beasts in the forest. Su Zimo had captured Ling Hu and the spirit leopard because he wanted to use them to decipher the secret of the sound of tigers and leopards in the marrow cleansing chapter. However, the spirit leopard was long scared of Su Zimo and did not dare to roar at him. Wouldn't that be courting death? Su Zimo froze for a moment and looked at Ling Hu instinctively. Ling Hu shuddered and sighed internally. Heist, the situation is forcing me. Now that my reputation has been destroyed, I can only obey him. Ling Hu sprawled on the ground and even scooted closer to Su Zimo. Blinking, he was a little bashful and coquettish. Ow! After that, Ling Hu looked at the spirit leopard smugly and thought to himself, see that? That's the real deal. For some reason, Su Zimo's hair stood on end when he heard that and instinctively kicked over. Bang! Before the smugness in Ling Hu's eyes disappeared, he was sent flying by Su Zimo's kick. The spirit leopard's mouth widened and it almost burst out laughing. Ling Hu flipped and leaped up. Enraged, he hollered internally, bloody hell! I'm not going to serve you anymore. However, when he met with Su Zimo's cold gaze, Ling Hu withered instantly and sprawled on the ground obediently, calling out coquettishly once more. Ling Hu no longer had the ferocity of a king of the forest. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had seen and heard it with his own eyes, he would have thought that he had captured a big cat instead of a tiger. While Ling Hu felt wronged, Su Zimo felt even more depressed. Initially, he wanted to solve the difficult problem of the marrow cleansing sutra from these two spirit beasts. However, both of them were abnormal. The spirit leopard was still alright and was slightly more normal. It was just too timid. However, Ling Hu was in heat. The strangest thing was that Ling Hu was clearly a male. Su Zimo looked at the two spirit beasts coldly, wondering if he should just slaughter them and eat their meat. The two spirit beasts had sharp senses and seemed to have sensed Su Zimo's killing intent. Scared out of their wits, they sprawled on the ground and whimpered continuously. Su Zimo sighed internally and gave up on that thought for the time being. Great Rock Forest. The elder of Spirit Peak, Pei Fu, rushed to Great Rock Forest with 12 inner sect disciples and met with Zhou Wei's group of 5. At that moment, Zhou Wei and the other 3 who were initially unconscious had already regained consciousness. However, they were severely injured and could not move at all, moaning weakly on the spot. When Pei Fu arrived, he swept his gaze and was relieved to see that the 5 of them were not in any danger. He asked in a deep voice, "What happened? Who did it?" "I don't know." Guochong wanted to cry but no tears came out as he replied pitifully, "The 5 of us were just here to take a look around Great Rock Forest." However, a half-naked burly man appeared out of nowhere and severely injured the 5 of us without a word. "What's the other party's name?" "I don't know." "What sect is the other party from?" "I don't know." Pei Fu berated, "What do you know?" "I only know that he's a burly man." Pondering for a moment, Pei Fu asked again, "What's his cultivation realm?" "Perfected qi condensation." Guochong replied without hesitation. In reality, all 5 of them knew that the other party was only at level 5 qi condensation. However, if word of this were to spread back to the sect that 5 disciples of Spirit Peak were severely injured by a burly man at level 5 qi condensation, they would definitely be mocked. Therefore, before Pei Fu arrived, the 5 of them had already agreed that the other party was at perfected qi condensation. Pei Fu frowned and asked again, "Why don't your injuries look like they were caused by cultivators?" "Elder, you don't know. That person must have cultivated some sort of powerful body tempering technique, and is extremely strong in melee combat. My flying sword can't hurt him at all." Guochong explained hurriedly, "Why aren't you consuming elixirs when you're so severely injured? Do you have a death wish?" That burly man took away all the elixirs in my storage bag and we're only left with a couple of pseudo-spirit weapons. Pei Fu heaved a long sigh and waved his hand. The inner sect disciples behind him hurried forward and took out jade bottles, pouring out elixirs and feeding them to Zhou Wei and the other four. Right then, two figures soared through the air and arrived before them in the blink of an eye at an extremely fast speed. They were the disheveled old man and Elder Lu, the peak master of Weapon Peak. Frowning, the disheveled old man asked, "Why are you guys here?" Pei Fu sighed gently. "The disciples of Spirit Peak were attacked, and we're here to provide reinforcements." "Why are you guys here? Are there disciples of Weapon Peak in danger as well?" The disheveled old man and Elder Lu exchanged glances with terrible expressions. Looking at Guochong and the other four, they asked darkly, "Have you guys seen the trial disciple of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo?" "Why yes, we saw him." Guochong pointed in the direction of Great Rock Forest with a guilty conscience. "We saw him enter Great Rock Forest and he didn't come out. It's over." The disheveled old man and Elder Lu's hearts sank. Chapter 84. Pei Fu could not help but ask when he saw the terrible expressions on the disheveled old man and elder's faces, "What's wrong?" "That trial disciple. He's the only person in Weapon Peak who has cultivated a level 3 spirit fire." The disheveled old man's tone was grim. "Level 3 spirit fire?" Pei Fu exclaimed, "I've also heard that there's a weapon refinement genius in Weapon Peak." "So he's Su Zimo?" Elder Lu said darkly, "Let's head to Great Rock Forest. I won't believe it until I see that lad's corpse." Pei Fu said, "Let's go. I'll accompany you guys to search." Pei Fu got the inner sect disciples behind him to bring Zhou Wei's group back first before entering Great Rock Forest with the disheveled old man and Elder Lu. The three of them split up and searched for a day and night without any results. Eventually, they arrived at the center of Great Rock Forest and saw the two pieces of the metal-devouring beast's corpse. That metal-devouring beast was about to advance to the spirit demon realm. To think that it would be killed here. Look at the traces left behind. It seems like the metal-devouring beast was torn apart by brute force. What immense strength. Pei Fu exclaimed softly and asked hesitantly, "Could it be that burly man?" "What burly man?" the disheveled old man asked. Pei Fu recounted how Guochong's group was attacked and said darkly, "According to Guochong, that burly man has immense strength and is extremely strong in melee combat. Don't let your guard down if he's from some heretical sect. It's clear that the burly man did not kill them. Otherwise, Guochong's group of 5 wouldn't have survived." Elder Lu analyzed. Furthermore, before the burly man left, he even brought Guochong's group out of Great Rock Forest. It's clear that he was worried that they would be injured by the spirit beasts in Great Rock Forest. That person's identity is mysterious. We can't tell if he's a friend or foe. The disheveled old man nodded. The moment Elder Lu thought about how Su Zimo's whereabouts were unknown, he could not help but sigh deeply with guilt. "Forget it, let's head back." The disheveled old man waved his hand with a fatigued expression. Although the 3 Jindan Taoist masters did not say anything, they all knew that Su Zimo was probably buried in the forest of great rocks. He did not even have the time to send out the spiritual crane for help. In reality, back when Su Zimo joined the sect, the 3 of them did not witness the scene of Su Zimo wrestling with the crane on the precipitous cliff. If they had seen that scene, the 3 of them would have realized that Su Zimo would not die so easily. For the past 2 days, Su Zimo did not gain anything from Linghu and the spirit leopard. Feeling frustrated, he remembered that he had yet to hand in the pure gold ores mission and left the cave abode. Riding on his sword, he arrived at the mission stele. There were quite a number of Weapon Peak disciples gathered around the stone tablet, including Shui Yi. Su Zimo walked over and asked, "Elder Lu hasn't returned yet?" "Yeah. He's been out for 2 days and hasn't returned yet." Shui Yi nodded. "What are you guys looking at?" Su Zimo noticed that many Weapon Peak disciples were staring at the mission stele and discussing fervently. Shui Yi pointed to the stele and said, "Look at the first mission." Su Zimo raised his head. 5 Peaks mission. Search for the mysterious burly man. Beside the mission was a portrait of Su Zimo in his previous disguise. "What's the meaning of this?" Su Zimo pretended to be ignorant and asked. Shui Yi whispered, I heard that a few disciples of Spirit Peak were attacked in Great Rock's forest by this mysterious burly man. He's at perfected chi condensation, and is said to be extremely strong in melee combat. Suzimo snickered internally. Even if they mobilized all the strength of the sect, they would not be able to find the mysterious burly man. Swoosh! Suddenly, the sound of clothes fluttering could be heard from afar. Everyone turned towards the sound and saw the disheveled old man and Elder Lu flying over from the skies, descending on the peak. The disheveled old man and Elder Lu swept their gazes before landing on Suzimo motionlessly. Their gazes looked as though they wanted to devour Suzimo. "Lad, you've returned alive from Great Rock's forest?" The disheveled old man gritted his teeth and asked word by word. The disheveled old man was infuriated at the thought of how the three of them had been searching for Suzimo's whereabouts without rest and worry the entire way. Yet, this lad had returned unscathed at some point in time. Elder Lu was even more enraged. Not only was he scolded by the disheveled old man because of Suzimo, he had been blaming himself for the past 2 days. But to think that this lad would be standing there perfectly fine without any hint of regret. Suzimo felt goosebumps from the disheveled old man and Elder Lu as he coughed gently and nodded. "Yes, I returned after completing my mission." "Nonsense!" The disheveled old man hollered. "Why didn't we see you on the way to Great Rock's forest?" "Ah!" Suzimo was stunned for a moment before replying. "I'm only at level 5 chi condensation. In order to conserve spirit chi, I didn't use sword kinesis flight for half the journey and walked on the ground. I'm sure you didn't see me, right?" Unless there was nothing to hide on the ground, no one would pay attention to someone walking on the ground. That made sense as well. The disheveled old man and Elder Lu could not admit that they were worried about Suzimo's safety and searched for him foolishly for an entire day and night. It would be embarrassing if they were to say that out loud. However, the two old men were filled with pent-up anger. They had nowhere to vent it. The disheveled old man and Elder Lu exchanged glances. They knew what the other was thinking even without saying anything. "We've got to find a reason to teach this brat a lesson." An undetectable craftiness flashed through Elder Lu's eyes as he said with a stern expression, "Lad, you didn't complete the mission in Great Rock's forest, right? Do you know that you'll be punished if you don't complete the mission?" To the two old men, it was already a miracle that Suzimo was able to return alive from Great Rock's forest. How could he possibly complete the mission? Furthermore, both of them had been to Great Rock's forest and the pure gold ore mine was guarded by a metal-devouring beast. Furthermore, the mine had long been cleaned out by someone else. Unexpectedly, Suzimo chuckled. "Fortunately, I didn't let you down. I completed the mission by luck." Ah! This time round, it was the two old men's turn to be stunned. Before they could react, Suzimo took out a huge pile of pure gold ore from his storage bag and piled it up into a small mountain that was taller than a person. Let alone the disheveled old man and Elder Lu. Many other Weapon Peak disciples were dumbfounded as well. The mission to search for pure gold ore only required one to bring back a small piece of pure gold ore again. But now, Suzimo had brought back a huge pile. A huge pile. What everyone did not know was that the huge pile before them was merely a third of what Suzimo had in his storage bag. Furthermore, Suzimo had an even more valuable pure gold ore hidden away. The two old men were stunned and speechless for a moment. After a moment, Elder Lu gulped and coughed gently. "Lad, your mission was done rather well." Cough cough. Elder Lu really wanted to criticize Suzimo. However, he could not bring himself to do so when he saw the huge pile of pure gold ore before him. Frowning, the disheveled old man asked, "Lad, didn't you see the metal-devouring beast beside the pure gold ore mine?" "I saw it." Suzimo nodded. "By the time I arrived, the metal-devouring beast had already been killed by someone. There were quite a number of pure gold ores left beside it, so I brought them back." "What the f***ck?" The two old men lamented internally. This lad's luck is way too good. Chapter 85. Suzimo only returned to his cave abode after handing in the mission, and receiving quite a bit of contribution points. The two old men looked at Suzimo's departing figure with emotional expressions and a myriad of thoughts, as expected of someone who has cultivated a level 3 spirit fire. "His luck is frighteningly good." The disheveled old man smacked his lips. "That's right, Elder Lu continued. The few trial disciples from Spirit Peak went to Great Rock Forest as well. I can tell that their cultivation isn't low, but they were severely injured in the end. That lad, on the other hand, went around Great Rock Forest with his level 5 Qi condensation cultivation. Not only did he not bump into that mysterious burly man, he even picked up so many pure gold ores and returned unscathed. That's not luck, what is it? The disheveled old man said regretfully. Actually, given that lad's talent in weapon refinement, it's best for him to join True Fire sect. It's truly a pity that he has to come to our Misty Peak. Our sect isn't good at weapon refinement and elixir refinement. I'll feel bad if that lad's future is held back because of that. Don't think so much. He's only just started learning about weapon refinement, and can't even refine inferior grade spirit weapons. Although our sect isn't strong in weapon refinement, we have the basics. Let's talk about it in the future, Elder Lu advised. The disheveled old man nodded and lowered his head in deep thought. It was still early when Su Zimo returned to his cave abode. According to his plan, he would focus all his energy on immortal cultivation during the day, either to raise his cultivation or to research weapon refinement. He would only start cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness at night. Before forming a core, be it Qi refinement warriors or foundation establishment cultivators, they were no different from ordinary people and required rest and sleep. The similarity between Qi refinement warriors, foundation establishment cultivators and ordinary people was their lifespan. The lifespan of Qi refinement warriors and foundation establishment cultivators was only slightly longer than ordinary people. Even if they were healthy, they could only live for slightly more than 100 years. However, it was different for demonic cultivation. Most of the demons went into hiding during the day, and only came out at night to hunt for food. Furthermore, they were extremely energetic. When night fell, Su Zimo was actually resting as well. However, after 2 years of demonic cultivation, he had already developed a habit. Even in his sleep, he maintained the breathing and expiration method of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. In this way, not only did Su Zimo not use up any of his immortal cultivation time, his demonic cultivation was also constantly improving. However, during this period of time there was no progress in the marrow cleansing chapter, causing him to reach a bottleneck in his demonic cultivation. For the next few days, Su Zimo forced the 2 spirit beasts to roar day and night. After a few days, the 2 spirit beasts had lost a lot of weight and their throats had become hoarse. However, Su Zimo still had no clue about the marrow cleansing chapter. He hadn't slept or eaten anything for a few days. Instead, he was shouting like an idiot in the cave abode. If it was a spirit demon, he would have lost half his life. Ling Hu and the spirit leopard were dispirited and listless as they sprawled on the ground, drowsy. Sigh, I've never seen such a difficult master. Ling Hu sighed. If you want to kill me, do it quickly. What's the meaning of torturing me like this? After a few days of torment, Su Zimo was also exhausted. Su Zimo did not idle either as the 2 spirit beasts roared. He listened attentively and was tense, afraid that he would miss out on any secrets. In the end, after a few days, Su Zimo was mentally exhausted and his eyelids were heavy. All he wanted was to fall asleep. Forget it, I'll kill these 2 spirit beasts and eat their meat tomorrow. Su Zimo collapsed on the stone bed. A thought flashed through his mind as he closed his eyes and fell asleep. Su Zimo was truly too tired. The moment he closed his eyes, he fell asleep. Subconsciously, he switched to the breathing and expiration methods of the body tempering, tendons transformation and bone strengthening sections. His breathing gradually became heavier. The 2 spirit beasts exchanged glances and felt relieved. That human has finally King stopped. Ling Hu was so emotional that 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks, almost howling into the skies. If this were to continue, Su Zimo wouldn't even have to do anything. Ling Hu was going to just bang his head against the wall and kill himself. When it saw that Su Zimo had fallen into a deep sleep, the spirit leopard's eyes shone with a ferocious glint even though it looked exhausted. It had to be said that this was a good opportunity. Although the 2 spirit beasts were mentally exhausted, they still had their stamina. If they could snap the human's throat, they might be able to escape. The spirit leopard looked at Ling Hu and growled deeply. Ling Hu naturally understood the language of the demon race. Although the spirit leopard's suggestion was good, Ling Hu did not want to take the risk. Who knew if the human was just pretending to be asleep? Furthermore, Ling Hu's only thought right now was to sleep. Shaking its head, Ling Hu sprawled on the ground and fell asleep. The spirit leopard had a hesitant expression. After a moment, as though it had made up its mind, a vicious glint flashed in its eyes as it tiptoed over to Su Zimo's side carefully with its killing intent retracted. Looking at Su Zimo's fair and slender neck, the spirit leopard opened its mouth slowly. It dared to guarantee that with this bite, even if it was a stone, it would be smashed into pieces. All of a sudden, as though it had discovered something, the ferocious glint in its eyes disappeared and was replaced by a look of panic. Slowly it closed its mouth as though it was yawning. Turning around, the spirit leopard's eyes were filled with fear and its limbs were trembling. Sprawled on the ground, it looked at Su Zimo, who was lying on the bed with his eyes closed with trepidation, not daring to do anything else. He was awake. That was the only word in the spirit leopard's mind. Just as it was about to chomp down, it suddenly realized that this human's breathing was different from just a moment ago. That change scared the spirit leopard so much that it broke out in cold sweat. The spirit leopard did not dare to do anything else and stayed at the side obediently, letting its imagination run wild for a long time before falling asleep. In reality, Su Zimo had already woken up the moment the spirit leopard's killing intent was triggered. Su Zimo's spirit perception was way too frightening. Back in Songlang Mountain Range, even the spirit monkey's sneak attack could not succeed, let alone this spirit leopard. Since he had to kill the two spirit beasts tomorrow anyway, Su Zimo could not be bothered to do anything now and continued sleeping. By midnight, Su Zimo and the two spirit beasts were already deep asleep. When Ling Hu was asleep, a strange sound came from his nose. Huff huff huff. After the spirit leopard fell asleep, a sound came from its nose as well, but it was different from Ling Hu's. The two sounds were unique and were neither loud nor soft as they intertwined and reverberated through the cave abode. At that moment, a miraculous change was happening in Su Zimo's body. The two sounds seemed to contain a mysterious power that could penetrate his flesh and tendons, and even seep into his bones, moving his marrow. Walala walala. His marrow let out a series of sounds under the vibration of the two sounds. It sounded like flowing water, crisp and pleasant. Su Zimo, who was in a deep sleep, seemed to have had a dream. He saw the marrow fluid in his bones flowing slowly, cleansing his bones continuously, seeping out streams of fresh blood that fused into his bloodline. Su Zimo jolted awake and opened his eyes. There were only two words in his mind: the sound of tigers and leopards. Chapter 86. Su Zimo laid on the stone bed motionlessly, listening carefully to the strange sounds that reverberated in the cave abode. As he experienced the flow of his bone marrow, all sorts of insights flashed through his mind as though he had been enlightened. The reason why the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness became increasingly difficult was that it was a process from the outside to the inside. First, one had to refine the skin, flesh, tendons, and then bones in an orderly manner. After skin, flesh, tendons, and bones, one had to refine the bone marrow, which was the marrow cleansing in the mystic classic. External skills were relatively easier to cultivate. That was because not only were there sutras and breathing techniques as the foundation, there were also many killer moves to refine the skin, flesh, tendons, and bones. For example, the Wild Bull 3 stances would refine the skin continuously, while the Divine Steed 3 stances would refine the bones. However, from the marrow cleansing section onwards, there were no more killer moves in the mystic classic. Su Zimo could only rely on his comprehension to understand the mysteries of the sutra. It wasn't that the mystic classic was incomplete. Instead, it was impossible to achieve marrow cleansing by just relying on the killer moves. The bone marrow was within the bones. External moves could only refine the bones at the deepest level, and would not be able to go any deeper. Hence, another path had to be taken and another type of power had to be used to refine the bone marrow. That power was the sound of tigers and leopards. Actually, Su Zimo was no stranger to that sound. Back in Pingyang Town, Su Xiaoning had a kitten. That kitten did not open its mouth and was expressionless. However, there would be a purring sound from its body that was extremely similar to the sound of tigers and leopards. Of course, be it the Ling Hu or the spirit leopard, They did not have the support of the marrow cleansing section and were not as strong as Su Zimo in terms of marrow cleansing. The sound of tigers and leopards was merely an opportunity for the marrow cleansing section. The true mystery lay within the sutra. Su Zimo recalled the sutra of the marrow cleansing section and began to imitate the sound of tigers and leopards. Huff huff Through repeated attempts and imitations, Su Zimo's body gradually emitted a strange sound. Under the vibration of the sound, the marrow in his bones flowed faster and faster, producing blood that fused into Su Zimo's bloodline. The meaning of marrow cleansing was to change blood. The vibration of the bone marrow would produce new blood that was far stronger than the blood in Su Zimo's body. According to the marrow cleansing section, if one had attained greater mastery of the marrow cleansing section, they would be able to kill mid-stage foundation establishment cultivators and even late-stage foundation establishment cultivators. That was the terror of marrow cleansing. Regardless of whether it was body tempering, tendons transformation, or bones forging, what was cultivated was ultimately only external strength. After entering the marrow cleansing section, Su Zimo was cultivating a power that originated from within his bloodline. Back in Songlang Mountain Range, Su Zimo was hunted down by the foundation establishment cultivators of Joyful Clan. His life was hanging by a thread, and he had only managed to escape with his sanguine ape transformation. The of the body of the body of the blood was marrow essence. Su was the Su marrow. Was the Su marrow of the S body. But from now on that would not happen. After the marrow cleansing section, the soft ape transformation was no longer useful to Su Zimo. That was because as long as Su Zimo attained lesser mastery of the marrow cleansing section, he would be able to release the terrifying power of his bloodline the moment he channeled it. In the blink of an eye, the night passed. Su Zimo had already grasped the basics of the sound of tigers and leopards. Su Zimo stood up. His heart was filled with joy and the haze from before was swept away. He had finally made some progress after being stuck on the marrow cleansing section for so long. Su Zimo looked at the Linghu and the spirit leopard with a smile. His initial intention of killing them had changed as well. No matter what, those two spirit beasts had contributed greatly to his understanding of the marrow cleansing section. The Linghu and the spirit leopard had long woken up. When they saw Su Zimo's smile, the two spirit beasts shuddered and felt their hairs stand on end. They had not seen Su Zimo smile during this period of time. But now this human was smiling. It's over, it's over. Seems like this human is going to lay his hands on me. The Linghu mourned internally. The spirit leopard was even more guilty. Last night, it nearly lost its life on the spot due to its killing intent. Right now, it lowered its head and did not dare to look at Su Zimo. Su Zimo walked forward and picked up the Linghu with his left hand and the spirit leopard with his right. Walking out of the cave abode, he headed straight for the front mountain. Passing through the thick fog, Su Zimo arrived outside the sect and placed the two spirit beasts down. You guys can leave. The Linghu, the spirit leopard. The two spirit beasts were stunned and could not wrap their heads around it for a moment. He was letting them go just like that? A moment later, the two spirit beasts were still sprawled on the ground like obedient kittens, not moving at all. Su Zimo smiled and waved his hand. Go on. You're not allowed to harm anyone from now on. This time round, the two spirit beasts could hear the casual and relaxed tone in Su Zimo's voice. It seemed like this human was truly going to let them go. The spirit leopard stood up slowly and moved a few times. When it saw that Su Zimo had no reaction, it walked into the distance. After taking a few steps, the spirit leopard turned back hurriedly, and was relieved when it realized that Su Zimo was not chasing after it. Even so, the spirit leopard did not dare to run and merely took small steps into the distance, turning back from time to time. The Linghu did not move and merely blinked at Su Zimo. Su Zimo asked, "Why aren't you leaving?" The Linghu grinned in a flattering manner and even wagged his tail in a serious manner. The moment he did that, the Linghu's heart skipped a beat and he cursed internally, "Bloody hell! I'm the king of the jungle. Why am I wagging my tail like a dog? If you're not leaving, I'm leaving." After saying that, Su Zimo turned and walked into the fog. The Linghu hesitated for a moment before following hurriedly. Su Zimo looked at the Linghu behind him and asked with a smile, "Why? You want to follow me?" The Linghu nodded hurriedly. The Linghu lamented internally, What kind of joke is this? That human is so sick that he's torturing me and yelling for no reason. How can he let us go so easily? He's playing hard to get. He must be playing hard to get. If we really run, he'll definitely kill us. The Ling Hu turned back and looked at the spirit leopard that was walking in fear not far away, mourning for it internally. Brother leopard, you're on your own now. I think you're not far from death. There was no way Su Zimo knew what the Ling Hu was thinking. When he saw how insistent the Ling Hu was, he did not reject it and led the latter through the fog formation. Along the way, the Ling Hu waited for Su Zimo to turn back and chase after the spirit leopard. However, even after they walked out of the fog formation, Su Zimo did not have any intention of turning back. The Ling Hu also realized that Su Zimo was truly going to let them go earlier on. *CK his grandpa. The Ling Hu grit his teeth and cursed internally. Doesn't that mean that I dug a hole for myself and jumped in? I even *King buried myself. There's still a chance. There's still a chance. The Ling Hu encouraged himself internally, and was prepared to find a chance to run without turning back. Right then a perfected Jin Dan soared through the air not far away. When he caught sight of Su Zimo below, he exclaimed softly and changed directions, descending before the man and beast. Chapter 87. Greetings, Master. The person who had arrived was the disheveled old man, the master of Weapon Peak. Su Zimo bowed. The disheveled old man nodded slightly and shifted his gaze to Ling Hu, who was behind Su Zimo, frowning. Ling Hu lamented internally. He had initially wanted to make use of the opportunity to escape, but this old man appeared out of nowhere. By the looks of it, this ugly old man was the master of this perverted human. Wasn't that even more perverted? This hole is a little deep. I'm doomed, the disheveled old man asked with a frown. This is your spirit beast. In the cultivation world, there was no lack of cultivators keeping spirit beasts as pets. In battle, spirit beasts were a part of the cultivator's strength as well. Su Zimo hesitated for a moment before nodding. The disheveled old man looked at Ling Hu and said in a low voice, "This spirit beast's potential is ordinary and nothing special. However, since you've chosen it, you'll have to sign a blood oath with it." Su Zimo remained silent. The disheveled old man continued, "Lad, remember this. Those who aren't of our race are bound to have ulterior motives. Furthermore, humans and demons are different, and it's hard to get rid of the bestial nature of demons. Cultivators have weak physiques and spirit beasts often accompany them. If they betray them and they're caught off guard, it's easy for them to die in the mouths of beasts. In the cultivation world, to prevent spirit beasts from betraying their masters, cultivators would sign a blood oath with spirit beasts. It was known as a blood oath in the cultivation world. If both parties were to sign a blood oath and the spirit beast had ulterior motives, its bloodline would flow in reverse and it would die on the spot. If a cultivator had a strong spirit beast, a mutated bloodline or an ancient ferocious beast, the increase in their strength would be obvious. Of course, the difference in strength between both parties must not be too great when signing a blood oath. Furthermore, the spirit beast could not resist or the blood oath would not be signed successfully. Therefore, supersex would provide spirit beast eggs or spirit beast eggs of mutated ferocious beasts to groom paragons. The success rate of signing a blood oath with a spirit beast when it was still young and ignorant was extremely high. Su Zimo had heard Ji Yaoshua mention the blood oath before, but he was extremely conflicted about this blood oath. It wasn't just because of Daiyu, nor was it because of his own demonic cultivation. It was more because Su Zimo didn't like being enslaved from the bottom of his heart, nor did he like enslaving others. This was tantamount to restricting the freedom of a life. This was even crueler than killing them. Su Zimo was more willing to use another method to interact with spirit beasts, just like how he interacted with the spirit monkey. Su Zimo believed that even without the blood oath, the spirit monkey would not harm him. When the disheveled old man saw that Su Zimo was silent the entire time, he thought that the latter did not know about the blood oath and smiled. Retrieving a piece of white paper from his storage bag, he wrote down a few incantations and handed it to Su Zimo, instructing, "Learn it. Consider it a small gift from your master." Incantations like the blood oath could only be exchanged with contribution points in the sect. This was equivalent to the disheveled old man secretly giving Su Zimo benefits. Su Zimo received the paper and nodded in thanks. Yes, head back. Hurry up and sign the blood oath with this Linghu before getting a spirit beast badge from the old gatekeeper. Don't drag it out for too long. The disheveled old man instructed again before soaring into the air and speeding out of the sect. At Misty Peak, the spirit beasts of cultivators would have a fixed badge to identify them, as well as allow them to freely enter the fog formation outside the sect. Linghu witnessed the entire process and his heart turned cold as he cried internally. It's really over now. I can't run anymore. After signing the blood oath, I'll truly be his tiger from now on. Su Zimo rode on his sword and Linghu followed suit. Before long, they arrived at Weapon Peak's cave abode. Throughout the entire process, Su Zimo said nothing with a calm expression. Arriving at the cave abode, Su Zimo casually crushed the white paper filled with the blood oath incantations into dust and disappeared into the air. When Linghu saw that, his mouth opened slightly in shock. Along the way, Linghu had been paying close attention. Su Zimo had not even glanced at the blood oath incantations at all. Now that he had destroyed the paper, could he have known about it beforehand? Turning around, Su Zimo looked at Linghu and said indifferently, I'm not going to sign a blood oath with you. If you choose to follow me, nod your head. If you don't, you can leave right now. Linghu was stunned. A choice. This human could have signed a blood oath with him, and he would not have dared to resist. But now the human was giving him a choice. Linghu felt an unprecedented sense of respect and trust. Ow! Ow! Instantly, Linghu's blood surged and his head heated up as he nodded furiously like a chick pecking at rice. Su Zimo smiled. All right, since you've chosen to follow me, you can't betray me. Of course, the same goes for me. The man and beast did not notice that in the depths of the clouds above their heads, there was a pair of eyes hidden, watching the scene below and hearing the conversation between the man and beast. Su Zimo walked into the cave abode and Linghu followed. The clouds in the sky churned as a pair of huge wings flapped across, blocking out the sun as they flew towards Misty Peak. After returning to this familiar cave abode where he had been tortured for the past few days, Linghu gradually calmed down and started to feel vexed again. Damn it, what happened to me just now? Why did I agree on impulse? This kid is obviously trying to bribe me. Sigh, that was irrational. Linghu regretted it, however. Linghu also felt a little embarrassed that he regretted it so quickly after agreeing. As long as he doesn't do me, I'll tolerate it even if he wants me to roar. I'll just stay here for now. Since I didn't sign a blood oath, I'm free to come and go. At that thought, Linghu no longer felt burdened and stayed in Su Zimo's cave abode for the time being. With an additional spirit beast by his side, Su Zimo's life did not change much. Linghu would occasionally head out to hunt for food, and would even bring some back for Su Zimo. Su Zimo also needed to devour flesh for his demonic cultivation. This saved him some effort and the essence of the scarlet flame fruit that was sealed in his body. In the following period of time, Su Zimo cultivated the marrow cleansing section in the cave abode while raising his cultivation realm and continuing to study weapon refinement. With the disheveled old man's hint, Su Zimo could look for him at the weapon refinement hall if he had any doubts and watch the images left behind by the seniors of the sect. During this period of time, Su Zimo had improved tremendously in the first 4 steps of weapon refinement. However, Su Zimo still had no progress on the most crucial 5th step of spirit gathering, and did not manage to refine an inferior grade spirit weapon. However, there was a huge pile of pseudo-spirit flying swords in his storage bag. As for spirit gathering, the disheveled old man once said that weapon refinement masters would cultivate a unique spirit perception after refining for a long time. For example, advanced weapon refinement masters, the success rate of refining inferior grade spirit weapons with a single spirit pattern was very high and was close to 100%. Su Zimo had spirit perception as well, but it was different from that of weapon refinement masters. He had been trying to use his spirit perception on spirit gathering, but could not find a breakthrough. During this period of time, Weapon Peak had another end-of-month test. Once again, Feng Haoyu came to Weapon Peak and even sent Qi refinement warriors to Su Zimo's cave abode to challenge Su Zimo. Su Zimo closed his door and refused to meet them. The reason why he participated in the previous end-of-month test was because he wanted to watch the images of the seniors of the sect refining weapons. Now that he could watch as he pleased, there was no need for him to waste time on it. As for Feng Haoyu's challenge, Su Zimo could not be bothered with it. Su Zimo did not realize that his rejection of the challenge had unknowingly caused the greatest storm in the history of Misty Peak. Chapter 88. In the blink of an eye, it had been more than 2 months since Su Zimo joined the sect. Half of the year had passed by as well. This day, Su Zimo was pondering about spirit gathering in his cave abode when Ling Hu's ears twitched. He could vaguely hear the sound of someone flying on a flying sword in his direction. Before long, a series of hurried knocks sounded from the door. "Bro, hurry and open the door. Are you there?" Little Fatty's voice sounded. Su Zimo had just gotten some inspiration when his train of thought was interrupted. Sighing internally, he floated down from the stone bed and walked out of his cave abode with Ling Hu following behind him. Ling Hu was even taller than Little Fatty and had a murderous expression. When Little Fatty caught sight of him, he was so shocked that he almost took out his flying sword and fled. When he saw the spirit beast badge hanging around Ling Hu's neck, Little Fatty heaved a sigh of relief and chuckled. "Bro, you're still the best. To think that you would bring a spirit beast with you. What's wrong? What's the rush?" When Su Zimo saw that Little Fatty's nose was covered in sweat, he knew that something must have happened outside and rushed over with all his might. Little Fatty slapped his forehead and said hurriedly, "Bro, it's bad. Disciples of Weapon Peak and Spirit Peak are fighting. It's right in Spirit Peak's Spirit Arena." Su Zimo frowned slightly and asked, "Speak slowly. What's going on?" "It's like this." Little Fatty sorted out his thoughts and explained the ins and outs of the matter. Su Zimo's gaze turned cold. So, the source of the conflict between the disciples of the two peaks was still him. During this period of time, Su Zimo had been living in seclusion and rarely showed himself. Because he did not participate in Weapon Peak's test at the end of the month, he did not even say a single word against Feng Haoyu's challenge, causing Feng Haoyu to think that he was being ignored. That was an utter humiliation. Naturally, the disciples of Spirit Peak mocked him, saying that Su Zimo of Weapon Peak was a coward who didn't dare to accept the challenge. Naturally, the disciples of Weapon Peak were displeased with that as both parties had been bickering non-stop. On this day, the conflict had completely erupted, and the disciples of the two peaks had agreed to battle. To be fair, other than Su Zimo, none of the disciples who were selected for Weapon Peak possessed a heaven spirit root. Furthermore, they were not adept at fighting amongst cultivators. Most of the disciples of Weapon Peak were focused on raising their cultivation and weapon refinement. For chi refinement warriors of the same level, disciples of Weapon Peak were no match for disciples of Spirit Peak. In fact, even if one's cultivation base was one level higher, they could still lose. There was no way Weapon Peak would win this battle. Without saying anything, Su Zimo summoned his flying sword and said in a deep voice, "Let's go to Spirit Peak." Ling Hu leaped onto it as well. As a spirit beast, it naturally had to follow beside Su Zimo. During this period of time, Su Zimo's cultivation had already risen to level 6 chi condensation. At full speed, the speed of his sword kinesis flight was almost the same as Little Fatty, who was at level 7. Little Fatty had a heaven spirit root as well. The fact that both of them were traveling at the same speed meant that the quality of Su Zimo's spirit chi was even higher than Little Fatty's. That doesn't make sense. Little Fatty clicked his tongue in wonder. "Bro, don't be rash later on." Just as they were about to reach Spirit Peak, Little Fatty caught sight of Su Zimo's cold expression and advised hurriedly, afraid that the latter would do something out of line. Su Zimo did not reply. In Misty Peak, cultivators were not allowed to fight casually. If there were any conflicts or grudges, they would have to go to the Spirit Arena. Each of the 5 peaks had a Spirit Arena located at the west of each peak. The west belonged to the metal element and was mainly used for killing. Even in the Spirit Arena, cultivators were not allowed to fight to the death or cripple their cultivations. It was enough to determine who was stronger. Of course, in fights, especially between cultivators of similar strength, it was often difficult to stop after a split second. There had been cases of people crippling fellow sect members in the Spirit Arena as well. Before long, Su Zimo and Little Fatty arrived in the skies above Spirit Peak. There was a dense crowd in the west and many disciples were watching. Su Zimo and Little Fatty landed outside the Spirit Arena. "Out of the way, out of the way!" Little Fatty used his fat body to forcefully open up a path. Many Spirit Peak disciples were about to turn back and scold him when they caught sight of the Linghu following behind Su Zimo. Instantly, they were shocked and swallowed their words. In front of Su Zimo, the Linghu was as obedient as a kitten. Now that they were outside, he looked majestic and would growl from time to time with a ferocious aura. Before long, the two of them and the beast arrived at the front of the crowd. Around the spirit arena, there were at least 2,000 trial disciples watching. It wasn't just Spirit Peak and Weapon Peak. Disciples from the other 3 peaks had rushed over as well. The commotion caused by this challenge was huge and could even be said to have shaken the 5 peaks. Those who could stand at the front of the crowd were mostly elites of Spirit Peak or geniuses of their respective peaks. Among them, Lung Ro, who possessed an ice spirit root, was watching as well with a cold expression as usual. In the spirit arena, a level 8 Qi refinement warrior of Spirit Peak was fighting with Shui Yi of Weapon Peak. Shui Yi was at level 9 Qi condensation and was even stronger than that person. However, he was completely suppressed and was at a disadvantage. It was only a matter of time before he was defeated. In a fight between Qi refinement warriors, there were relatively few methods they used: spirit weapons, talismans, and other external items. Even though they were both riding on a flying sword, the level 8 Qi refinement warrior of Spirit Peak was extremely agile and flexible, suppressing Shui Yi from the beginning to the end. On the other hand, Shui Yi's flying sword was much clumsier. That person's name is Sun Tao and he has a heaven spirit root. He's nothing much in Spirit Peak and only listens to Feng Haoyu. Humph bro, even though I'm at level 7 Qi condensation, it's still unknown who will win against that person, Little Fatty whispered at the side. Su Zimo nodded and turned to look at Feng Haoyu, who was dressed in purple robes and had an arrogant expression. Right then, Feng Haoyu turned around and caught sight of Su Zimo as well. A playful look flashed through Feng Haoyu's eyes. Fufu, you're finally willing to show yourself. Sneering internally, Feng Haoyu suddenly raised his voice. Sun Tao, there's no need to drag things out. Hurry up and win. The genius of Weapon Peak is here to watch. Feng Haoyu emphasized on the word, genius. Instantly, countless gazes landed on Su Zimo. Lung Ro glanced sideways and glanced at Su Zimo indifferently before turning back. Even in the midst of the intense battle, Sun Tao could still divert some of his attention to look outside. When he caught sight of Su Zimo, Sun Tao burst into laughter and conjured hand seals with both hands. Instantly, his flying sword shone brightly and burst forth with power, sending Shui Yi's flying sword flying and stabbing towards Shui Yi's chest. A look of panic flashed through Shui Yi's eyes as he wanted to dodge. However, his body stiffened when he caught sight of the incoming flying sword. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes. Just as the flying sword was about to pierce Shui Yi's chest, Sun Tao chuckled and flicked his sword upwards. The flying sword pierced through Shui Yi's shoulder, causing blood to spurt out. With a dull grunt, Shui Yi staggered from the force and fell out of the spirit arena. A few Weapon Peak disciples hurriedly helped Shui Yi back and applied medicine on his wound to stop the bleeding. The Weapon Peak disciples glared at Sun Tao, who was walking down from the spirit arena, and hollered, "We've already decided who's better. Why are you still hurting him?" Humph, who's to blame for being inferior? Sun Tao sneered, "Weapon Peak is all you guys know how to bicker. So what if you're at level 9 Qi condensation? You're just a level higher than me in my eyes." Chapter 89. Throughout the entire process, Su Zimo did not say a single word and was frighteningly calm. Standing beside him, Little Fatty could naturally sense the terrifying aura emanating from Su Zimo's body. Bro, if you want to fight, don't do it below. According to the sect rules, if cultivators want to spar, they can only do it in the spirit arena. Even though Su Zimo was only at level 6 Qi condensation, for some reason, Little Fatty had always thought that Su Zimo was extremely strong. Terrifyingly strong. Su Zimo walked up and checked on Shui Yi's wound. The sword had pierced through his shoulder, and it would take at least a month for him to recover. Shui Yi's face was pale. When he caught sight of Su Zimo, he forced a smile. "Junior brother Su, you're here too?" "Yes." Nodding, Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "Senior brother, rest well. I'll help you vent your anger." "Don't." Shui Yi's expression changed as he grabbed Su Zimo's arm hurriedly and shook his head. "Junior brother Su, don't fall for it. They're trying to provoke you into the spirit arena and severely injure you so that you won't be able to participate in the Weapon Peak face-off at the end of the year. That's right, Junior Brother Su. Don't interfere in our matters. As long as you can defeat Feng Haoyu in the Weapon Peak face-off at the end of the year, you'll be able to vent our anger for us. A Weapon Peak disciple at the side persuaded hurriedly as well. Su Zimo shook his head. When he saw that, Shui was even more anxious. Junior Brother Su, you've been in the sect for less than 3 months and you haven't even come to Spirit Peak to hear about how cultivators fight. What do you have to compete with them? You're only at level 6 Qi condensation and I'm at level 9. Don't be silly. Even though Shui's words were unpleasant, they were filled with concern. Fu Sun Tao, who had just left the spirit arena, passed by Su Zimo and the others. When he heard that, he chuckled and raised his brow. If Junior Brother Su wants to spar, we have disciples at level 6 Qi condensation in Spirit Peak as well. If not, we can find someone at level 5 Qi condensation to spar with you. How about that? Haha. A burst of laughter came from the crowd. Junior Brother Su, I'm at level 5 Qi condensation. I'm willing to fight you in the spirit arena. Do you dare to accept my challenge? A Spirit Peak disciple stood out. Another disciple of Spirit Peak shouted, Junior Brother Su, we joined the sect together. Even though I'm only at level 4 Qi condensation, I dare to fight you. Feng Haoyu looked at Su Zimo and said leisurely, if you want to find a level 3 Qi refinement warrior to be your opponent, Spirit Peak is really not available. Ha ha ha. The crowd laughed even louder. You've gone too far. The disciples of Weapon Peak were livid. Little Fatty sighed softly at the side. After all, he was someone from Spirit Peak. Even though he was on Su Zimo's side, it was not his place to say anything. Covering his wound, Shui said in a deep voice, Junior Brother Su, let's go back. Don't be fooled. This started because of me to begin with. Logically speaking, I should be the one to end it. The moment he said that, Su Zimo's gaze shifted to Feng Haoyu and he said slowly, Feng Haoyu, for the sake of the title of number 1 of the 3 peaks, you've done so much in the open and in the dark. Initially, I thought that you were someone important. But now? Su Zimo did not continue and merely shook his head. A cold glint flashed through Feng Haoyu's eyes as he asked coldly, Su Zimo, what do you mean by that? Haven't you always wanted to fight with me? Su Zimo said, as you wish. Let's go to the spirit arena. Gradually, the crowd quietened down. Everyone looked at Su Zimo in shock, unable to believe what they had just heard just now. Su Zimo wanted to challenge Feng Haoyu? One was at level 6 Qi condensation while the other was at level 8. One was a disciple of Weapon Peak who was not good at fighting, while the other was the number 1 genius of Spirit Peak. The difference between them was like heaven and earth. Little Fatty was stunned as well. Even though he felt that Su Zimo was strong, he wasn't strong enough to challenge Feng Haoyu. Now that Su Zimo had declared war on Feng Haoyu, Little Fatty was instantly flustered. Junior Brother Su, don't do this. Shui thought that Su Zimo was too young and impulsive to challenge Feng Haoyu. Ha 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 ha. After a momentary silence, an even louder laughter broke out from the crowd. Some of the Spirit Peak disciples clutched their stomachs and laughed. I can't take it anymore. This Su Zimo is way too funny. To think that he wants to challenge Junior Brother Feng. This is called a mantis trying to stop a chariot. He's overestimating himself. That's right. Who knows how he can even have the cheek to say that? That guy's really thick-skinned. Feng Haoyu smiled without saying anything and merely looked at Su Zimo quietly. There was no need for him to say anything in the current situation. Su Zimo had already turned into a laughingstock and had suffered a crushing defeat. Sun Tao sneered at the side. Are you even qualified to challenge Junior Brother Feng? Su Zimo glanced at him and said indifferently, don't be hasty. Once Feng Haoyu is done for, you're next. Roar. Suddenly, Ling Hu lowered his body and let out a deafening roar. Instantly, the clamor and laughter around the spirit arena quietened down. Many of the surrounding sect disciples were shocked and retreated instinctively. The crowd pushed and shoved as a commotion broke out. Ling Hu surveyed the surroundings with a torrential malevolent aura. His round tiger eyes were filled with ferocity as he bared his fangs. Some of the female disciples were so frightened that they shrieked. Ling Hu was smug and swept away his previous dejection. The fact that Ling Hu was subdued by Su Zimo did not mean that he was weak. On the contrary, Ling Hu was very strong and was comparable to a high-level qi refinement warrior. In terms of a life-and-death battle, it was still unknown who would emerge victorious. Most of the Spirit Peak disciples went out frequently, and had been through many battles as well as spirit beasts. At this moment they were more composed. Glancing at the badge hanging around Ling Hu's neck, they realized that this was Su Zimo's spirit beast. Narrowing his eyes, Sun Tao came up with a plan and stepped away easily, avoiding Ling Hu's line of sight. Secretly, he drew out a flying sword with a vicious glint in his eyes. Swoosh! The flying sword left his hand and pierced towards Ling Hu's head. This time round, Sun Tao's attack was extremely stealthy and without any warning. Coupled with the fact that there were more than 2,000 people surrounding the place, the aura was chaotic and noisy. By the time Ling Hu realized it, the flying sword had already arrived before him. That sword was way too vicious and was aimed to kill Ling Hu without any intention of holding back. At the moment when his life was on the line, Ling Hu leaped and tilted his head, dodging to the side with all his might. Shing! A streak of blood flashed by. The flying sword drew a long and bloody wound on Ling Hu's side. His flesh was torn apart and blood flowed endlessly. Ow! Ling Hu fell to the ground and let out a tragic cry. His body trembled and his eyes were filled with pain. Su Zimo's expression changed and he spun around. When he caught sight of Ling Hu lying on the ground injured, his killing intent surged. Sun Tao's target was not Su Zimo. Therefore, his spirit perception did not detect any danger. By the time he heard the sound of the flying sword, it was already too late. Furthermore, Su Zimo's back was facing Sun Tao earlier on and his attention was on Feng Haoyu. He had not expected that someone would dare to disregard the sex rules and attack in the spirit arena. When he caught sight of Su Zimo's gaze, Little Fatty's heart skipped a beat and he thought to himself, "It's over. Something bad is about to happen." Chapter 90. Sun Tao's eyes flashed with frustration that he did not manage to pierce through Ling Hu's head. He snorted coldly. "Consider yourself lucky, bastard. You're hoarding." Su Zimo's eyes shone with a demonic red glow as he hollered. Suddenly, he took a step forward and traversed 20 feet, arriving before Sun Tao instantly. That was the Plow Heaven stride. Although it looked ordinary, its aura was terrifying. Sun Tao was so scared that his face was drained of color. In a trance, he felt that he was not facing a human, but an ancient ferocious beast. Su Zimo's murderous aura was torrential. With a flip of his hand, he pressed down on Sun Tao's face viciously. Bang! Sun Tao could not retaliate at all. He only felt his vision turn black as he was pressed down by Su Zimo. His head slammed heavily on the ground, creating a huge pit. He fainted on the spot, bleeding from his 7 orifices. Right above the spirit arena, in the depths of the clouds where one could not see, a confused exclamation could be heard. A pair of gigantic wings was faintly discernible as a pair of cold eyes watched everything that was happening below. Strange, why does this lad's bloodline have? An almost inaudible murmur could be heard from above the heavens. Below the spirit arena, this unforeseen event caused an uproar. First, it was Sun Tao's sneak attack that severely injured Su Zimo's Ling Hu. Everyone could still accept this scene. But the next moment, everyone was stunned. By the time Little Fatty wanted to stop it, it was already too late. No one would have thought that Su Zimo would dare to attack Sun Tao. Even more so, no one expected that Sun Tao would be knocked out by Su Zimo with a single slap. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Careless, he must have been careless. A thought flashed through everyone's mind. As a level 8 Qi refinement warrior, Sun Tao was defeated by a level 6 Qi refinement warrior of Weapon Peak in a single move. There was only one possibility: Sun Tao was careless. It's over, it's over. Big Brother disregarded the sex rules and attacked a fellow disciple in the spirit arena. Moreover, we don't know if Sun Tao is dead or alive. This is troublesome. Little Fatty scratched his ears and cheeks. His mind raced as he tried to think of a solution. Insolent. How dare you? Su Zimo, you actually dared to disregard the sex rules and hurt your fellow disciples. You're the one who's courting death. Many disciples of Spirit Peak rushed out from the crowd and surrounded Su Zimo. Their expressions were unfriendly as they glared at him and hollered. Feng Haoyu stood not far away and watched this scene. A trace of ridicule flashed past his eyes as he sneered in his heart. Looks like there's no need for me to make a move. What a boorish fellow, haha. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged and his gaze was cold. Ignoring the surrounding Spirit Peak disciples, he squatted down and applied some medicine on Linghu's wounds. Linghu endured the pain and blinked as he looked at Su Zimo. He was inexplicably moved. Seeing this scene, Leng Ro, who was standing at the side, nodded secretly. Everything else aside, the fact that he could remain so composed in the face of thousands of murderous Spirit Peak disciples was proof of his mental fortitude. Leng Ro admitted that she could not be as composed as Su Zimo. Everyone, don't be rash. Don't be rash. Little Fatty jumped out hurriedly and bowed in all directions with a smile. It's fine if everyone were to fight, but wouldn't that violate the sex rules as well? When they heard that, many Spirit Peak disciples hesitated and froze on the spot. It was not appropriate for them to strike directly. Feng Haoyu's gaze flickered. Suddenly, he turned sideways and whispered to a Spirit Peak disciple beside him. The disciple nodded in understanding and left on his flying sword, speeding towards Spirit Peak's palace. When Leng Ro saw that, a look of disgust flashed through her eyes. Needless to say, Feng Haoyu must have sent someone to inform the seniors of the sect to deal with Su Zimo. Su Zimo, do you really think that there's no one in Spirit Peak who can stop you from hurting someone in Spirit Peak? Just as both sides were in a stalemate, Feng Haoyu suddenly spoke. When he heard that, Little Fatty's heart sank. How sinister! Feng Haoyu's words were meant to strike at Su Zimo's heart, afraid that he wouldn't be able to fight the Spirit Peak disciples. The bigger the commotion, the more severe Su Zimo's punishment would be. Indeed, the moment Feng Haoyu said that, the initially hesitant Spirit Peak disciples' expressions changed as they placed their palms on their storage bags, ready to strike at any moment. Finally, one of the Spirit Peak disciples could not hold it in any longer. Harumphing coldly, he walked up and grabbed Su Zimo's hair. Barking hatefully, Su Zimo, I'm asking you a question. Don't act dumb. Get lost. Without even turning back, Su Zimo flung his arm. Although it looked soft, it was like a whip that let out a crisp sound in the air. Piak. Before the Spirit Peak disciple's palm could even touch Su Zimo, he was sent flying by Su Zimo's slap. Falling into the crowd, he coughed out blood and fell to the ground with a mouthful of broken teeth. Everyone was shocked. Little Fatty was on the brink of tears. He had been trying to stop the situation from worsening. To think that everything would go to waste. Su Zimo's attack was so fast that no one could react in time. With that, the Spirit Peak disciples were thoroughly enraged. Many of them summoned their flying swords and hovered in the air, ready to strike. Dozens of Weapon Peak disciples surrounded Su Zimo, and summoned their flying swords as well. Both sides were on the verge of breaking out into a huge battle at any moment. The smile in Feng Haoyu's eyes intensified. Don't move, don't move. When Little Fatty saw the situation, he felt his scalp tingle as well. Withdrawing a gigantic axe from his storage bag, he held a talisman in his left hand and slapped it on Su Zimo. Instantly, a barrier of light appeared around Su Zimo's body. It was a protection talisman. Little Fatty did not use it himself and instead gave it to Su Zimo. Su Zimo felt a warmth in his heart. Little Fatty's action would undoubtedly offend many of his fellow disciples of Spirit Peak. Damned Fatty, whose side are you on? A Spirit Peak disciple hollered. Little Fatty's expression darkened as he retracted his smile and scolded. See your mother. Why do you care whose side I'm on? Little Fatty's scolding stunned many of the Spirit Peak disciples instead. Ever since they entered the sect, none of them had seen Little Fatty blushing. He was always smiling at everyone with a kind expression. In terms of popularity, Little Fatty was even better than Feng Haoyu. Realizing that he had lost his composure, Little Fatty muttered, Fatty is Fatty. Don't call me damned Fatty. Suddenly a soft holler sounded from afar. Everyone disperse. A sword beam sped over and arrived above everyone's heads in the blink of an eye. In front of the flying sword was a cultivator at early-stage foundation establishment. Behind him was the Spirit Peak disciple who delivered the message. Greetings, Senior Brother Chen. Senior Brother Chen, you've come at the right time. Please uphold justice for Spirit Peak. Su Zimo of Weapon Peak has disregarded the sex rules and ambushed a fellow disciple. Many Spirit Peak disciples recognized this person and shouted with cupped fists. Little Fatty whispered hurriedly, "Bro, you must not offend this person. He's a disciple of the Intersex Disciplinary Hall, Chanyu. He's on good terms with Feng Haoyu. He's definitely here to cause trouble for you. Bear with it if you have to." Pausing for a moment, Little Fatty reminded Su Zimo once more. Afraid that he was unaware of the severity of the situation, "We can't afford to offend intersect disciples. Otherwise, we'll definitely suffer after we advance to the intersect. Furthermore, this person is from the disciplinary hall." Chapter 91. It was only natural for disciples of the disciplinary hall to deal with them for violating the sex rules. However, if the intruder was on good terms with Feng Haoyu, things would be interesting. The intruder had ill intentions. The disciplinary hall disciple, Chanyu, had a dark expression as he swept his gaze across the messy scene below. Landing on the ground slowly, he surveyed his surroundings and asked in a deep voice, "Who's Su Zimo?" At that moment, Su Zimo had just finished treating Ling Hu's wounds. The red glint in his eyes had already disappeared and was replaced by an imperceptible look of worry. Su Zimo wasn't worried about the so-called disciplinary hall disciple behind him. He was worried about something else. When he heard Chanyu's question, Su Zimo patted Ling Hu's body to comfort him before standing up. Turning around, he replied calmly, I heard that you've been in the sect for less than 3 months? Yes. How dare you? Chanyu hollered with a hint of coldness in his voice. Su Zimo remained silent. Hands behind his back, Feng Haoyu smirked with a mocking gaze. The moment Chanyu arrived, Feng Haoyu knew that Su Zimo had already suffered a crushing defeat. He could not think of any chance for this man to make a comeback. Being banned from the Weapon Peak face-off at the end of the year for violating the sex rules might even be considered a light punishment. A heavy punishment would be an indefinite confinement or even having one's cultivation crippled and banished from the sect. Looking at Su Zimo's silence, Chanyu sneered internally and declared loudly, "Su Zimo, you have violated the sex rules and harmed a fellow disciple. In the name of the disciplinary hall, I'm crippling your cultivation and banishing you from the sect." The moment he said that, everyone's expressions changed. That punishment was way too severe. Even the disciples of Spirit Peak felt that it was cruel, let alone the disciples of Weapon Peak. They looked at Su Zimo with pity in their eyes. Those who could enter Ethereal Peak were all people with excellent aptitude and temperament. But now, because of a mistake, their cultivation was crippled and they were reduced to mortals. They were even expelled from the sect. This blow was hard for anyone to accept. Lung Ro frowned and looked at Su Zimo subconsciously. To her surprise, this green-clothed man's expression didn't change in the slightest from the beginning until the end, and his eyes were calm as if he didn't hear what Chanyu said. "Have you lost all hope? Or are you scared, silly?" Perhaps Lung Ro would never have thought that Su Zimo was so calm because he was fearless and had already made his plans. No one could take away his cultivation. If Chanyu dared to attack him, he would dare to kill him with a knife. In the worst-case scenario, even if his cultivation was crippled, he could still continue his demonic cultivation. Today's matter would not end well. Little Fatty looked hesitant and struggled in his heart for a long time. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore and said loudly, "Senior Brother Chan, this disciple feels that this punishment is too severe. Please reconsider, Senior Brother Chan." That's right, Senior Brother Chan. After all, Su Zimo has just joined the sect for less than 3 months. It's understandable. That's right. Situations like this have happened in the past as well. I've never heard of anyone being crippled or chased out of the sect because of this. Many Weapon Peak disciples pleaded hurriedly as well. Humph! Chanyu harumphed coldly and said loudly, "All of you shut up. Since you're indignant, I'll tell you why. Ignoring the sect rules and harming fellow sect mates is a serious matter. However, because of this, it nearly led to internal strife between disciples of Spirit and Weapon Peak. This is unforgivable. If I had arrived slightly later, the disciples of both peaks would have fought and there would have been heavy casualties. Who would be able to bear the responsibility?" According to what Chanyu said, this was indeed a grave sin. For a moment, everyone fell silent. Right then Su Zimo spoke. According to what senior brother Chan said, I shouldn't be the cause of this matter. Everyone can see that I wasn't the one who provoked you. Sun Tao was the one who struck first. If we're talking about violating the sect rules, he was the one who did it first. When he heard that, he shook his head with a look of mockery in his eyes. Oh, Chen Yu was expressionless as he asked, Sun Tao attacked you? Yes, Su Zimo nodded. A bunch of nonsense. Chen Yu said sternly, Sun Tao clearly attacked your spirit beast. Although the sect doesn't allow cultivators to attack in private, there's no rule stating that cultivators can't attack spirit beasts. Sun Tao's actions aren't considered as violating the sect rules. It was only at this moment that some people realized that Sun Tao's decision to attack Su Zimo's spirit beast back then was premeditated. However, he had not expected to be knocked out by Su Zimo with a single palm strike. Su Zimo replied calmly, since he attacked my spirit beast, he attacked me as well. There's no difference. Fufu. Chen Yu scoffed coldly. How dare you quibble at this moment? A spirit beast is a spirit beast. It's just a beast. You're ignoring the sect rules and attacking fellow sect mates because of a beast? That's an even greater crime. In my eyes, spirit beasts are no different from humans. Some humans are even worse than spirit beasts. At the very least, spirit beasts don't scheme against each other or scheme against you. Su Zimo said indifferently, if spirit beasts are only beasts in your eyes, some humans are worse than beasts in my eyes. So what if I hit them? When he heard that, Feng Haoyu's expression turned terrible. These words were like the tip of a needle, stabbing straight into his chest. Many people present could tell that there was a hidden meaning in Su Zimo's words. Little Fatty and Shui could not help but exclaim in delight as well. If it was them, they would definitely not dare to say those words in front of a disciple of the disciplinary hall. What a glib-tongued person. Chun Yu's voice was cold and killing intent surged in his heart. Trial disciples of the 5 Peaks were gathered around. But now, Su Zimo was talking back to him continuously, causing Chan Yu's face to turn ugly and he could not get out of the situation. If he could not establish his authority today and make an example out of this, his status as a disciple of the disciplinary hall would be greatly reduced in the future. Su Zimo, don't force me to kill you. Chun Yu narrowed his eyes and no longer concealed the killing intent in his heart. Little Fatty shuddered and tugged at Su Zimo's sleeves hurriedly, indicating for him to stop talking and stop here. Everyone could tell that if Su Zimo dared to talk back to Chun Yu again, Chun Yu would definitely make a move and kill Su Zimo right here and now. Shui looked at Su Zimo nervously and shook his head furiously. The atmosphere around the spirit arena dropped to freezing point instantly. That scene was beyond everyone's expectations, including Feng Haoyu's. Nobody had expected Su Zimo to be so unyielding, showing off his edge and refusing to back down. Lowering his gaze, Su Zimo placed his palm on his storage bag. In the blink of an eye, a long saber with a cold glint appeared in his hands. Pust! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Su Zimo's actions were way too dangerous and would definitely attract death. Before everyone could finish their thoughts, Su Zimo said indifferently, "If you dare touch me, I'll kill you." Tit for tat. The 2,000-odd disciples of the 5 Peaks were in an uproar. Chapter 92. In the depths of the clouds, the pair of eyes hidden had yet to leave, watching everything that was happening below the entire time. Upon hearing Su Zimo's words, a hint of playfulness flashed through those eyes. What a boastful young lad. Interesting. Below the spirit arena, many disciples were shocked. They did not think about how a level 6 Chi refinement warrior like Su Zimo could challenge a disciple of the disciplinary hall. Everyone was only thinking about how Su Zimo had the courage to say that. There were only 2 possibilities. He was either a fool or a lunatic. Everyone looked at Su Zimo as though they were looking at a dead man. Initially, according to Chan Yu, Su Zimo was only going to be crippled of his cultivation and chased out of the sect. But now, Chun Yu could kill Su Zimo right here and now. Good, good, good. Chun Yu was so angry that he laughed and nodded repeatedly, saying coldly, "To think that the trial disciples of the sect would have fallen to such a state. Since you want to die so badly, I'll fulfill your wish." Slapping his storage bag, a flying sword landed in Chun Yu's palm. Spirit chi was injected into it and the flying sword shone brightly. 2 spirit lights shone on the sword in a bedazzling manner. Middle-grade spirit weapon. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes and was about to make a move when an authoritative voice sounded from the void. Stop! Immediately after, a figure sped over at an alarming speed. Without relying on external objects, he soared into the air. Perfected Jin Dan. Chun Yu glanced sideways and frowned. With perfected Jin Dan's arrival, it was not good for him to make a move no matter how bold he was. Chun Yu's expression was dark as he glared at Su Zimo, suppressing the killing intent in his heart for the time being. The person was in his 40s or 50s and arrived at lightning speed. His white robes fluttered in the wind, and he had the demeanor of an otherworldly immortal. There was an image of a flying sword on the sleeves of that person's white robes. Spirit Peak's master Wen Xian. Back when he joined Misty Peak, Su Zimo had seen this person at the peak of the front mountain. Greetings, master. The disciples of Spirit Peak shouted. Greetings, first seat. The disciples of the other 4 peaks also hurriedly bowed. With the arrival of Spirit Peak's master, there was no way a fight would break out. Little Fatty, Shui and the others heaved a sigh of relief as their expressions relaxed. Next, it was up to the Peak Master of Spirit Peak to deal with this matter. Su Zimo hesitated for a moment before putting the Cold Moon Saber back into his storage pouch. Chief, this Su Zimo. No need, I already know. Chun Yu was the first to speak, wanting to tell Spirit Peak's master Wen Xian about what had happened just now. However, Wen Xian waved his hand and interrupted him. Wen Xian stood in the air and looked at Su Zimo without saying a word. His expression seemed calm, but no one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, Wen Xian asked slowly, Su Zimo, do you know your mistake? When they heard that, Little Fatty, Shui and the others were overjoyed. By the looks of it, there was a high chance that Wen Xian would not punish Su Zimo as severely as Chun Yu did. Before the joy in Little Fatty and the others' eyes dissipated, Su Zimo's next sentence caused their expressions to freeze. A commotion broke out in the crowd as well. I didn't do anything wrong. Su Zimo raised his head and looked at Wen Xian, his tone calm. It was still reasonable for Su Zimo to go against Chun Yu. However, it was truly irrational for him to go against a peak master. In reality, Su Zimo had never been a rational person. Otherwise, he would not have straightened his back and refused to kneel when he was bullied by perfected being Songlang back at Pingyang town. He would not have headed forth alone to kill the king of Yen and break out of the encirclement despite knowing that the capital of Yen country was heavily guarded. He would not have headed forth resolutely even though he knew that he would definitely die if he tried to stop the Foundation establishment cultivators of Joyful Sect. Right was right and wrong was wrong. Su Zimo would not give in to pressure. Not far away, the other 4 peak masters were watching the situation from afar, observing the development of the situation. How could the 5 peak masters not know about the huge commotion caused by the battle between the disciples of the 2 peaks? When he heard Su Zimo's reply, Array Peak's master sighed gently. Although this lad's personality is not likable, it's truly rare and I admire him. Cultivators have to have the guts and boldness to go against the heavens. Cultivating the Tao is a heaven-defying act to begin with. Even though that's the case, this lad's future path is bound to be filled with obstacles. The 3 peak masters discussed amongst themselves. Weapon Peak's disheveled old man shook his head and said nothing. It was not appropriate for them to step in since this happened in Spirit Peak. Below the Spirit Arena. After hearing Su Zimo's reply, Wen Xian went silent for a moment. Su Zimo, let me ask you a question. Wen Xian said slowly, since Sun Tao injured your spirit beast today, you injured him as well. If Sun Tao were to kill your spirit beast, what would you do? As though realizing something, Ling Hu suddenly growled. Ling Hu's intelligence was no less than that of an adult, and it could see everything clearly. Right now, as long as Su Zimo lowered his head and submitted, he would be given a lighter punishment. Ling Hu's growl was to stop Su Zimo. Su Zimo turned back to look at Ling Hu, who was lying on the ground, and suddenly smiled. Su Zimo already had an answer to that question. Back when perfected being Songlang killed his mount Zhui Feng, Su Zimo wanted to take revenge, let alone Ling Hu, who had already become his spirit beast. Su Zimo replied, of course I'm going to kill him. You're going to kill your own sect mate for a spirit beast? Yes. Give me a reason. Since the spirit beast has chosen to follow me, I, Su Zimo, will naturally have to protect him. Roar! Roar! Ling Hu ignored the wounds on its body and struggled to stand up. Walking to Su Zimo's side, it whined softly and rubbed its head against Su Zimo's arm repeatedly. Ling Hu had never truly wanted to follow Su Zimo. Furthermore, without the restrictions of the blood oath, Ling Hu could leave at any time. It was only at this moment that Ling Hu truly made up his mind that he would never leave this person before him for the rest of his life, even if they did not sign a blood oath. Far away, the four peak masters frowned when they heard the conversation between the two of them. Previously, no matter how much trouble Su Zimo caused, they could still accept it since things were not blown out of proportion. But now, Su Zimo had expressed his determination to kill his own sect mate for the sake of his spirit beast. That was something that the four peak masters could not accept. At that moment, even perfected being Jin Dan did not realize that there was a pair of eyes hidden in the depths of the clouds above their heads, watching everything below silently. When it heard Su Zimo's reply, that pair of eyes was slightly stunned. Immediately after, a look of admiration flashed through its eyes as it pondered. Master, I think Su Zimo has a cold personality and has no feelings for his sect mates. If he stays in the sect from now on, I'm afraid he'll attract more trouble. Right then Feng Haoyu finally spoke. Every single word of his could be said to strike at the heart. In other words, he still wanted to chase Su Zimo out of the sect. Wen Xian remained silent. Countless eyes were on Wen Xian, waiting for his final decision. Chapter 93. Suddenly Wen Xian asked, Su Zimo, you have a heaven spirit root. Given your potential, you can definitely join Spirit Peak. However, do you know why you were asked to join Weapon Peak back then? I don't know, Su Zimo replied. Su Zimo was not the only one who was puzzled. Many other disciples were as well. This was especially the case for Little Fatty and the others who joined the sect at the same time as Su Zimo. They had personally witnessed how Su Zimo ascended the peak and survived the 8 distresses formation. There was no reason for someone like that to not join Spirit Peak. Your killing intent is too strong and you're too sharp. Asking you to join Weapon Peak to learn weapon refinement is also a way to temper your temperament and grind away your sharp edges. When the time is right, you can naturally join Spirit Peak once more. At that point, everyone was enlightened. Wen Xian shook his head with a look of pity in his eyes as he sighed. It's a pity that you're still the same even after 3 months of training. Everyone could hear the deep disappointment in Wen Xian's tone. Pausing for a moment as though he had made a decision, Wen Xian took a deep breath and declared loudly, Su Zimo, trial disciple of Weapon Peak, you have violated the sect rules today and nearly caused a disaster. Yet, you're not repentant. As the master of Spirit Peak, I hereby announce that Su Zimo is forbidden from taking a single step into Spirit Peak from now on. The 2,000-odd disciples of the 5 peaks around the spirit arena were silent. This punishment was much lighter than the crippling of one's cultivation and expulsion from the sect that Chan Yu had mentioned. However, for trial disciples, not being able to enter Spirit Peak meant that they would not be able to learn the fighting techniques of Qi refinement warriors. That was a huge loss. Little Fatty, Shui, and the others heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, being forbidden from entering Spirit Peak was much better than crippling one's cultivation and expelling one from the sect. Although Feng Haoyu was expressionless on the surface, he was indignant internally. The reason why he had created this situation today was so that he could squeeze Su Zimo out of the sect. To think that it would still end in failure. Even though the punishment seemed severe, it did not affect Su Zimo's participation in the year-end face-off. For Feng Haoyu, that was not good news at all. Chun Yu's face also darkened. If Wen Xian hadn't appeared, as far as he was concerned, Su Zimo would already be a dead man. Unfortunately, he was a step too late. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have wasted my breath on him. I would have just killed him. This brat has no respect for his elders and actually dares to talk back to me. If it was said that Chan Yu had only stepped forward to help Feng Haoyu and wanted to give him a favor. And now, Chan Yu completely hated Su Zimo. Many disciples looked at Su Zimo, waiting for his response. After a while, Su Zimo smiled and said lightly, this disciple is willing to accept the punishment. But the hearts of Little Fatty and the others had just settled down, but they were raised again. Su Zimo changed the topic and looked at Feng Haoyu with a sharp gaze, saying slowly, "Today's matter won't end here. Feng Haoyu, you and I both know the reason why the disciples of the two peaks are fighting. Since you want to fight, I, Su Zimo, will fulfill your wish." Feng Haoyu sneered in disdain. "Initially, I only intended to participate in the year-end face-off. But now I've changed my mind." Su Zimo said indifferently, "Listen up. Not only will you not be able to get number 1 of Weapon Peak, you won't be able to get number 1 of Elixir Peak as well." Prior to this, Feng Haoyu had already declared that he wanted to get number 1 of Spirit, Elixir and Weapon Peaks. Now that Su Zimo said that, his motive was clear: he wanted to stop Feng Haoyu. However, the moment Su Zimo said that, a series of mocking laughter broke out from the crowd. Even though both Elixir and Weapon Refinement required spirit fires, they were two completely different fields of knowledge. There had never been anyone in the cultivation world who was both an Elixir and Weapon Refinement master. Furthermore, there was a limit to a person's energy and time. Spending a portion of it on Weapon Refinement and Elixir Refinement was already the limit, let alone mastering both and getting number 1 of them. Right now, there was only half a year to the year-end face-off. That might not be enough time. Of course, it was undeniable that Su Zimo had cultivated a level 3 spirit fire. If he were to focus on Elixir and Weapon Refinement for the next half a year, he would indeed be a huge threat to Feng Haoyu. Also, just as everyone was deep in their thoughts, Su Zimo spoke once more, and his next words caused an uproar. "Peak Master forbade me from entering Spirit Peak, so naturally, I can't participate in the Spirit Peak face-off. However, after the Spirit Peak face-off, regardless of whether you get number 1 of Spirit Peak, I, Su Zimo, will declare war on you. Let's meet in the Spirit Arena." The 2,000-odd disciples of the 5 peaks were dumbfounded and stunned on the spot. Su Zimo's final words were truly unexpected. Everyone in the 5 peaks knew that Su Zimo had cultivated a level 3 spirit fire. If he wanted to compete with Feng Haoyu in terms of Elixir and Weapon Refinement, everyone could understand. But now Su Zimo, a level 6 Qi Refinement warrior, was declaring war on Feng Haoyu. That was insane. Su Zimo had to spend most of his time, effort and time on Elixir and Weapon Refinement in half a year's time. How would he have the time to raise his cultivation realm? Even if Su Zimo could reach perfected Qi condensation, he was not good at fighting and did not have the chance to enter Spirit Peak to learn how to fight. What did he have to fight against Feng Haoyu? He was asking for humiliation. Fufu. At that moment, Feng Haoyu finally laughed and nodded. "Very good, junior brother. Su's boldness and guts are indeed extraordinary. Since that's the case, I'll definitely accept your challenge. I hope that you can give me a surprise then." "Don't worry." Su Zimo smiled as well. "There will definitely be surprises, but there's no guarantee of happiness." Heis! Many disciples of Weapon Peak heaved a long sigh with grim expressions. No one knew what little Fatty was thinking about as he looked worried. The disciples of Talisman, Array and Elixir Peak were excited, waiting to watch the show at the end of the year. However, the disciples of Spirit Peak were waiting to see Su Zimo make a fool of himself. Before long, today's incident would spread throughout Misty Peak, and many inner sect disciples would know about it as well. At that time, there would definitely be many inner sect disciples who would come to watch the match. No matter what, after this incident, the 5 peaks face-off at the end of the year would be different from previous years and would be the center of attention. Lung Ro's gaze had been fixated on Su Zimo for a long time now. Every single action and word of this delicate-looking man was unexpected, causing Lung Ro to be curious. She had an indifferent personality and did not care about anything other than cultivation. However, at that moment, Lung Ro was filled with anticipation as well. She was looking forward to the end of the year face-off to see how this green-robed man would end up. Would he become a laughingstock or would he shine brightly? Chapter 94. Su Zimo summoned his flying sword and helped Ling Hu up carefully before leaping up. Nodding to Shui Yi and the others, he said, "Senior brothers, I'll be leaving first. Let's go together." Many disciples of Weapon Peak summoned their flying swords one after another and followed Su Zimo, leaving Spirit Peak. Fatty had a hesitant look on his face. After a moment of hesitation, he made up his mind and gave chase. Before long, Su Zimo and the others disappeared from everyone's sights. On Spirit Peak, the disciples of the other 3 peaks gradually dispersed as well. Even though the commotion was over for now, everyone knew that the 5 peaks face-off at the end of the year would definitely cause a huge uproar. As for who would rise and fall, they would only know half a year later. At the same time, a pair of gigantic wings tore through the void from the depths of the clouds and disappeared, landing in Ethereal Palace. If any sect disciple were to witness this, they would definitely recognize the owner of the wings. It was the mystical guardian beast of their sect, that frightening crane. The crane's gigantic body landed in Ethereal Palace. Instantly, it transformed into a beautiful woman with a head of red hair that was tied up in a bun with a graceful bearing. Caw-caw! The cry of a crane sounded from the depths of the room. A smaller crane sensed the aura of the red-headed beauty and flapped its wings, running over with an aggrieved expression. That crane was the one that stopped Su Zimo and the others at the front of Misty Peak back then. The red-headed beauty shook her head and chuckled. Looking at little crane beside her with a doting expression, she said gently, "Why? You feel aggrieved because I locked you up?" "Caw!" Little crane cried out a few times, as though it was trying to explain something. The red-headed beauty looked at little crane in deep thought. After a moment she said softly, "Child, I've always been worried about your future. I can't bear to see you become someone else's spirit beast and be enslaved, losing your freedom. However, I know that if you stay by my side, this day will come sooner or later. I won't be able to protect you forever." Little crane did not know why its mother was so melancholic all of a sudden. Feeling a little afraid, it huddled closer to the red-headed beauty. The red-haired beauty smiled and said, "However, I've discovered an interesting person in the past few days. He's quite suitable to be your master. If you follow him, you definitely won't suffer." Chirp chirp. Little crane called out a few more times. The red-haired beauty stroked the little crane's head and said, "You can't always follow me. I'm already old and you still have a long way to go." Little crane's mood sank. After a while, the little crane could not hold back its curiosity and asked again. The red-haired woman pursed her lips and smiled. "You know this person as well. You even fought with him on the mountain wall in the front." "Caw-caw! Caw-caw!" Little crane was stunned for a moment before it became agitated. It shrieked shrilly with rage and disdain in its eyes. "He!" The red-haired beauty chuckled. "He's a bit weak now, but you might not be his match. Also, this person, has some secrets on him. It's hard to say what he will achieve in the future. Of course, the most important thing is that you don't have to sign a blood oath with him. You're still free." Little crane called out a few more times, as though it was still unwilling. The red-haired beauty nodded. "Of course, that's up to you. I won't force you. What I mean is that there's no harm for you to interact with him. If you truly like him, you can stay by his side. If you don't, you can just leave." Little crane cried out softly. The red-haired beauty said, "Yes, of course, it's not related to you. You can go out and have fun from now on. Just don't cause any trouble." Little crane rolled its eyes and thought to itself, "Humph, I hate that person to death for grounding me for so long. Mother even wants me to follow him? Dream on. I'm going to find a chance to take revenge on him this time around." How could the red-haired beauty not know what little crane was thinking when she saw its expression? She lowered her head and smiled without pointing it out. In the void not far away from Spirit Peak, the 4 peak masters were present. Wen Xian had just arrived after settling matters of Spirit Peak. "Wen Xian, thank you. I owe you a favor." The disheveled old man cupped his fists. Given his status as a peak master, there was no need for him to appear for today's matter. He could have just left it to the disciplinary hall. It was only because the disheveled old man was worried that something would happen to Su Zimo that he got Wen Xian to settle the matter. Wen Xian waved it off. "There's no need for that between us." Pausing for a moment, Wen Xian sighed. "Actually, I had no intention of forbidding Su Zimo from entering Spirit Peak. However, that lad is arrogant and said something so disgraceful. In a fit of anger, I made this decision to let him suffer some setbacks. No matter what, I still have to thank you for stepping in." The disheveled old man said. Chi refinement warriors only have that bit of capabilities, and it doesn't matter if he learns it or not. As long as he can advance to Foundation Establishment realm and become an inner sect disciple, it's the same even if he learns combat techniques. However, his fight with Feng Haoyu at the end of the year. When Xian hesitated, the disheveled old man shook his head. As you said, so be it if he lost. It's good for him to suffer a little. It's better for him to suffer a little in the sect than to lose his life in the cultivation world in the future. Suddenly, Array Peak's master, Xianyi, said, Actually, Su Zimo isn't entirely to blame for what happened today. That Feng Haoyu is rather scheming. Elixir Peak's master, the brown-haired youth, remarked meaningfully. When Xian frowned and shook his head in displeasure, Feng Haoyu is merely a little more ambitious. That lad isn't a bad person. The brown-haired youth shrugged. Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. Xianyi hurriedly changed the topic with a smile. The five of them chatted for a while more before going their separate ways. The moment Su Zimo arrived at his cave abode, Little Fatty caught up from behind. Bro, hold on, Little Fatty shouted hurriedly. Su Zimo turned back to look at Little Fatty, who had landed, and smiled. I have to thank you for speaking up for me today. That's nothing. Little Fatty waved it off nonchalantly. Su Zimo thought of something and said apologetically, Because of me you've offended quite a number of people today. I'm afraid you won't have a good time in Spirit Peak from now on. Hee. Bro, you're worrying too much. Even though I'm only at level 7 Qi condensation now, there's still half a year before the end of the year, and I have a chance of reaching perfected Qi condensation. By then there won't be many people who can beat me. If anyone is unhappy, they can just go to the spirit arena, Little Fatty said with a relaxed expression. With that said, Little Fatty sighed again. Bro, you were truly too rash when you challenged Feng Haoyu at the end. Oh. Su Zimo could tell that Little Fatty seemed to be implying something. Little Fatty asked, Bro, do you know of the 3 secret skills of Ethereal Sect? No, Su Zimo shook his head. Little Fatty explained, the reason why Ethereal Sect was able to become one of the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty was because of these 3 secret skills. Even if you're promoted to an inner sect disciple, you won't be able to cultivate them. It's only possible if you become a legacy disciple of the inner sect. Chapter 95. Legacy Disciple? Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. This was the first time he had heard of such a title. Little Fatty nodded. Actually, there are legacy disciples in every sect. They are the geniuses that the sect values the most and nurtures with all their resources. However, there are different ways to describe them. Some sects call them core disciples as well. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he asked, You mean to say that Feng Haoyu is a legacy disciple? Not yet. Little Fatty continued, however, as long as Feng Haoyu is promoted to an inner sect disciple, it's only a matter of time before he becomes a legacy disciple. That's because he has already started cultivating one of the 3 major secret skills of the sect, Ethereal Sword. I heard that it was my master who went to beg the Patriarch for this to happen. When he heard that, Su Zimo's expression turned grim. To possess the rights to cultivate the 3 major secret skills before becoming a legacy disciple meant that the sect valued this person greatly. For it to be called a sect's secret skill and even the 5 major sects' reliance, this secret skill was naturally not to be underestimated. Of course, to Su Zimo, the key to victory in this battle was not Feng Haoyu, but himself. The moment Su Zimo attacked Sun Tao at the spirit arena of Spirit Peak, he discovered a hidden danger in his body. If he could not get rid of this hidden danger, his battle with Feng Haoyu at the end of the year would not be optimistic. Little Fatty remained silent for a moment before smiling. However, bro, since you've made this decision, I'll still stand on your side. It's fine if I can't ascend Spirit Peak. In this half a year, I'll come and spar with you whenever I have the chance. I'll help you raise your combat strength and familiarize you with the killing techniques of Qi refinement warriors. Alright, Su Zimo nodded. It's just that time is a little tight. After all, bro, you still have to raise your cultivation realm and learn how to refine elixirs and weapons. No matter what, do your best and leave the rest to fate. After Little Fatty left, Su Zimo brought Linghu back to the cave abode. Su Zimo sat on the stone bed, no longer concealing the worry in his eyes. If it was before he cultivated the marrow cleansing chapter, Su Zimo was absolutely confident that he could suppress Feng Haoyu with his terrifying physical body and powerful close combat strength. But now, after practicing the marrow cleansing chapter, Su Zimo's body had undergone some reasonable and unexpected changes. Marrow cleansing meant changing one's blood. Although this newborn blood was powerful, it carried obvious traces of the demon race. On Spirit Peak, Su Zimo's killing intent surged when he saw Ling Hu injured. Instinctively, he channeled his bloodline and suddenly felt his body showing signs of demonization. This feeling had only appeared when he had used the Sanguine Ape transformation. Su Zimo took a deep breath and slowly activated his bloodline. A powerful aura burst out from his bloodline and spread to every corner of his body. Su Zimo could clearly feel his body expanding and strengthening. This kind of swelling was much more obvious than the swelling of the flesh and blood, and the tightening of the tendons. This was a complete change. His clothes burst apart and turned into a pile of shreds. Although he could not see his own appearance, Su Zimo already knew that he was no longer the refined scholar he used to be. Ling Hu stood at the side with widened eyes, trembling in fear. It was not only because Su Zimo's appearance was unfamiliar to him, but also because of the aura emanating from Su Zimo's body that caused him to feel a bone-deep fear. Su Zimo lowered his head and saw the fingernails on his left hand extending slowly. They were white and sharp like blades, and when they collided gently, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. With a single thought, those shimmering fingernails were retracted. Ling Hu was dumbfounded. Su Zimo's palm was no different from a tiger's paw. It could extend and retract its claws at will. Green veins popped up on Su Zimo's arm and blood vessels covered it like coiling snakes. It was terrifying. How was that a human's arm? Su Zimo made use of spirit chi to conjure a water mirror. Through the sparkling light, Su Zimo caught sight of a half-human, half-demon appearance. He resembled an ape and human with bloodshot eyes that were menacing and terrifying. Su Zimo's arm trembled and the water mirror disappeared. The changes were almost all over his body. Su Zimo's right hand was the only one that remained the same, fair and smooth with long fingers. No different from a human's. There had always been something strange about his right hand. Back then, Su Zimo noticed that when his right hand could conjure a level 3 spirit fire. However, he did not know the exact reason. Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and his bloodline calmed down gradually, causing his demon form to fade as well. That was the consequence of demonic cultivation. The changes were not obvious for the first 3 segments of body tempering, tendons transformation and bone strengthening. But now that he had started the blood swap, Su Zimo was showing signs of evolving into a true demon. That was not what Su Zimo wanted. No matter what, Su Zimo was a human and did not want to become a true demon. Right now, he had yet to attain lesser mastery of the marrow cleansing section. If he continued cultivating it, once he attained lesser mastery or even greater mastery, his bloodline would change completely and Su Zimo would probably never be able to return to his current state. It was almost imaginable that if Su Zimo had not controlled himself back on Spirit Peak and revealed his demon form, there would only be 2 outcomes for him. First, he would be killed on the spot. Second, he would sign a blood oath with someone and become their spirit beast. If Su Zimo revealed his demon form, no one would treat him as a human. As a demon, the only way to survive in the cultivation world was to become a spirit beast of cultivators. Or perhaps, he could leave the sect and live in the forests of the mountains forever, mixing with true spirit beasts and cutting ties with all his kin so that he would never acknowledge them again. Su Zimo could not do that. However, Su Zimo was indignant about giving up on demonic cultivation from now on. What should I do? Su Zimo was lost. Of course, the greatest challenge for Su Zimo right now was his battle with Feng Haoyu at the end of the year. Right now, Su Zimo could not control his bloodline at all. The moment he released his melee combat strength and his bloodline boiled, his demon form would definitely be revealed. At that time, there was no need for Feng Haoyu to make a move. The many seniors of the sects watching would suppress him. If he wanted to defeat Feng Haoyu, he could only rely on immortal cultivation methods and the fighting techniques of chi refinement warriors. However, Su Zimo was practically a blank in this aspect and had never practiced before. There was only half a year left before the end of the year face-off. He had to raise his cultivation realm, refine elixirs, refine weapons, learn sword wielding and fight against chi refinement warriors. Su Zimo intended to put the marrow cleansing section aside for the time being. It was not only because time was tight, but more so because he did not dare to continue cultivating. At the very least, Su Zimo could only stop his demonic cultivation before he found a solution to the hidden dangers of demonic transformation. Su Zimo took out his weapon tripod from his storage bag and continued studying spirit gathering. Su Zimo had a feeling that he might be able to find a way to gather spirit very soon and take the most crucial step in weapon refinement. Chapter 96. A refiner's spiritual sense was something that had been accumulated over a long period of time. It was something that could only be cultivated after countless refinements. It was a very precious feeling. Su Zimo had only been in contact with weapon refinement for less than 3 months and naturally could not cultivate such a perception. However, Su Zimo possessed a spirit perception as well. This kind of spiritual sense was extremely sensitive to danger. How could he use his spiritual sense on spirit gathering? Su Zimo conjured a scarlet level 3 spirit fire in his right palm and began warming the tripod. A moment later, Su Zimo withdrew a pure gold ore from his storage bag and placed it into the weapon tripod. He tossed in some other supplementary materials and began smelting. Under the scorching heat of the level 3 spirit fire, the materials within the weapon tripod melted into a liquid state and bubbled. Spirit chi seeped out of the materials and spiraled within the weapon tripod, thickening gradually. The impurities within the spirit liquid were purged, and its volume shrunk continuously as well. Before long, the smelting was completed. Su Zimo retracted his spirit fire and waited for the temperature within the tripod to drop as he adjusted his breathing and prepared to shape. After a moment, Su Zimo suddenly stood up and conjured a pair of spirit hands. He reached into the weapon tripod and began pinching. Before long, the outline of a flying sword appeared within the weapon tripod. Fourth step, tempering. The level 3 spirit fire appeared once more and burned the flying sword to a scarlet state. Su Zimo began hammering within. After 3 months of practice, Su Zimo was extremely familiar with the first 4 steps of weapon refinement. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water without any sluggishness. Within 15 minutes, the tempering was completed. Once again, it was the most crucial step of spirit gathering. Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief and furrowed his brows slightly. At this step, Su Zimo had already failed countless times and destroyed too many flying swords. How could he resolve this problem? Spirit perception, danger, spirit gathering, failure, flying sword shattering. Countless words and images flashed through Su Zimo's mind repeatedly. All of a sudden, Su Zimo's eyes lit up as an idea flashed through his mind. He thought of an idea. Su Zimo's heart pounded uncontrollably. His face was filled with excitement, and his eyes were filled with joy. This method could very well solve the problem of spirit gathering. In fact, it could even achieve a 100% success rate in spirit gathering. One had to know that even the advanced weapon refiners who could forge upper-grade spirit weapons did not dare to say that their success rate in forging lower-grade spirit weapons was 100%. One could only say that the success rate was very high. Su Zimo took a deep breath and suddenly withdrew the weapon refining cauldron. Logically speaking, the spirit gathering step should be carried out in the weapon tripod. The fundamental reason for this was that no one could guarantee the success rate of spirit gathering. Once it failed, the flying sword would explode on the spot, causing sword fragments to fly everywhere. The more spirit inscriptions were condensed, the more terrifying the explosion of the flying sword would be when it failed. It could even threaten the life of the blacksmith. If it was carried out in the weapon crafting cauldron, when the flying sword exploded, the sword shards would hit the walls of the cauldron and would not bounce out. Naturally, the weapon crafting master would not be injured. But now, Su Zimo had suddenly removed the weapon crafting cauldron, exposing himself to possible dangers. This was an action that was way too dangerous. If any seniors of the sect were to see this, they would definitely speak up to stop Su Zimo. However, at that moment, the glint in Su Zimo's eyes intensified. He wanted to expose himself to danger. That was the only way for his spirit perception to be truly useful. Su Zimo controlled the rich spirit chi around the flying sword and slowly gathered it on the sword. All of a sudden, Su Zimo's mind was alarmed. Su Zimo stopped condensing spirit inscriptions hurriedly. The flying sword was perfectly fine without any changes. Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, if he had continued condensing spirit inscriptions, the flying sword would have exploded on the spot if nothing went wrong. Sensing danger, Suzumo's spirit perception warned him in advance. This was what it meant to be a cicada sensing autumn before the wind blows. Suzumo adjusted his state slowly and controlled spirit chi to gather it on the sword once more. Alarms flashed once more. Suzumo stopped what he was doing and continued to adjust without being in a hurry. For the rest of the time, Suzumo attempted spirit gathering repeatedly. However, he gave up once more when he sensed danger. Time flew by and in the blink of an eye, an hour had passed. Finally, the spirit inscriptions on the sword gradually became clearer, but Suzumo did not sense any danger at all. The spirit inscriptions were gradually taking form. OM. The sword vibrated gently and a clear sword hum reverberated through the cave abode. It was done. A clear spirit inscription was condensed on the sword and shone with a resplendent light. Although it was only an inferior grade spirit weapon, it was created by him. Looking at the flying sword that was hovering not far away, Suzumo felt a sense of pride that he had never felt before. If the spirit gathering failed, the flying sword would explode and the weapon refinement master would be in danger. However, with his spirit perception, Suzumo could sense the danger beforehand. In reality, it was equivalent to knowing that the spirit gathering would fail in advance. From there, he could give up on the spirit gathering and make adjustments before trying again. This method of spirit gathering was unprecedented and difficult for future generations to replicate. This was a unique spirit gathering method that belonged to Suzumo. At that moment, Suzumo did not realize that his action of removing the weapon tripod would have a huge impact on the weapon refinement world of the future, causing countless weapon refinement masters to imitate it. Not far away, a spirit inscription was condensed on the scarlet sword. There was still plenty of spirit chi in the surroundings, and it was enough for a second spirit inscription. A bold idea flashed through Suzumo's mind. Since this spirit gathering method could have a 100% success rate, he might as well attempt to condense a second spirit inscription and create a middle-grade flying sword. Suzumo composed himself and continued to burn the flying sword. The sword was scarlet and crystalline. Swoosh! Spirit chi surged and gathered on the sword. No! Suzumo was alarmed once more and stopped hurriedly. It was yet another long period of repeated attempts that ended in failure. In the blink of an eye, for hours had passed and there was still no success. Each time he attempted spirit gathering, Suzumo would sense the danger beforehand. After such a long period of consumption, Suzumo's spirit chi was almost depleted and he was mentally exhausted as well. He could not hold on any longer. Seems like I've underestimated weapon refinement. Suzumo shook his head. Right after he created an inferior grade spirit weapon, Suzumo had a momentary fantasy that he would be able to create a supreme grade spirit weapon of his own before long. But now it seemed like that was too naive and idealistic. No matter what, for Suzumo, creating inferior grade spirit weapons was no longer an issue. Furthermore, he had even created a spirit gathering method that belonged to him. As long as he made good use of it, he would definitely be able to create supreme-grade spirit weapons in the future. Heaving a sigh of relief, Suzumo placed the scarlet flying sword in cold water for the final quenching step. Shing! The scarlet flying sword collided with the cold water and white smoke billowed out. The power of cold and heat caused the flying sword to become even more indestructible, and the spirit inscription was set. Looking at the unusually sharp flying sword in his palm that shone with a cold glint, Suzumo smiled. Chapter 97. For the next few days, Suzumo was not in a hurry to leave his cave abode. Instead, he chose to continue his seclusion and practice the spirit-gathering technique that he had created. Just as he had expected, after removing the weapon tripod, he could indeed achieve a 100% success rate in spirit gathering. However, it was a pity that he could only condense a single spirit pattern at a time. When it came to condensing a second spirit pattern, he had not succeeded even once. Initially, Suzumo thought that it was because of the materials. However, after changing to pure gold crystals, there was still no effect. Suzumo could not figure it out and decided not to spend any more time and effort on weapon refinement for the time being. With a 100% success rate of creating inferior-grade spirit weapons, Suzumo was definitely going to win at the year-end face-off. There was still half a year left. Not only did Su Zimo have to raise his cultivation realm and learn sword-wielding to kill, he also had to learn elixir refinement. However, Su Zimo knew nothing about elixir refinement. Su Zimo did not intend to spread the news either. It was way too shocking that he could create an inferior-grade spirit weapon after just 3 months of learning weapon refinement. Furthermore, Su Zimo intended to defeat Feng Haoyu completely at the year-end face-off. If the news were to spread now, Feng Haoyu might choose to avoid the battle. This day, Su Zimo walked out of his cave abode and headed for Elixir Peak on his flying sword. He intended to focus on learning elixir refinement for the time being. The 5 peaks were not far from each other, and before long, Su Zimo arrived at Elixir Peak. Every day at noon, elixir refinement masters from the inner sect disciples would come and explain elixir refinement techniques. All disciples of the 5 peaks could come and listen. Elixir Peak and Weapon Peak were similar in strength, and were the 2 weakest peaks of Misty Peak. However, there were more disciples of Elixir Peak than Weapon Peak. The reason was simple. After becoming an elixir refinement master, one could refine their own elixirs, and it would be of great help to raise one's cultivation realm. However, even if weapon refinement masters could create spirit weapons, it would only increase their strength and not their cultivation realm. There were many cultivators who were extremely talented in weapon refinement. However, they did not form a core and died of old age after 100 years. More importantly, alchemy was much simpler than artifact refining, as there was no spirit gathering step. Since ancient times, other than Su Zimo, no other weapon refiner dared to say that it was a 100% success rate in spirit gathering. Su Zimo's arrival at Elixir Peak attracted a lot of attention. After the incident in the spirit arena, there were very few trial disciples who did not recognize Su Zimo. Everyone knew about the competition between Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu. The disciples of Elixir Peak were not surprised to see Su Zimo here. Noon. The inner sect alchemist standing at the front of the Elixir Peak square pressed his hands in the air, and the slightly noisy crowd gradually quieted down. Before you start concocting pills, there are a few things that you must know. The inner sect alchemist said slowly. There are 9 levels of elixirs. Generally speaking, level 1 elixirs are suitable for Qi refinement warriors, level 2 for foundation establishment cultivators, and level 3 for perfected Jindan. If a Qi refinement warrior were to consume a level 3 elixir, there would be no benefits and they might even die on the spot. When he heard that, Su Zimo nodded to himself. The logic was simple. It was just like the scarlet flame fruit that he had devoured previously. The energy was too immense and his body could not withstand it, resulting in him exploding and dying. Those who can refine level 1 elixirs can be called elementary alchemists. Those who can refine level 2 elixirs can be called intermediate alchemists. Those who can refine level 3 elixirs can be called advanced alchemists. I am Bushuezhen and I am an intermediate alchemist. The many disciples below revealed looks of envy and respect. Everyone, you've all heard of the saying that any medicine is 30% poisonous. Bushuezhen continued. It's the same for elixirs in the cultivation world. However, the so-called poison refers to the impurities in the elixir. The lesser the impurities in the elixir, the better the quality of the elixir. If the impurities in the elixir are more than 80%, it would truly be a poisonous elixir for cultivators. The crowd chuckled softly. Senior Brother Bu, how do you differentiate the quality of an elixir? The Array Peak disciple who asked the question was clearly new to elixir refinement as well. Bushuezhen's gaze paused on Su Zimo for a moment as he smiled. I see that there are disciples of Weapon Peak below. Actually, the quality of an elixir is similar to the grade of a spirit weapon. There are obvious patterns. However, for elixirs they are known as elixir patterns, while for weapon refinement, they are known as spirit patterns. Every grade of elixir has 5 types of quality. The lowest grade elixir will have an elixir pattern. Of course, elixir refinement masters don't have to condense it. It merely represents the amount of impurities in the elixir. An inferior grade elixir with a single elixir pattern will have 40% impurities. A middle grade elixir with 2 elixir patterns will have 30% impurities. Similarly, 3 elixir patterns will be superior grade, and 4 will be supreme grade. If one can condense 5 elixir patterns with 0 impurities and all medicinal energy, it will be called a perfect elixir. When he heard that, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. It was as Bushuezhen had said. There were spirit patterns in the grades of spirit weapons as well. A spirit weapon that could condense 4 spirit patterns would be called a supreme grade spirit weapon. If one could condense 5 spirit patterns, it would naturally be stronger and would be called a perfect spirit weapon as well. In reality, as Su Zimo had expected, there were indeed perfect spirit weapons above supreme grade spirit weapons. The reason why the weapon refinement masters of the sect had never mentioned it was because spirit gathering was way too difficult. Even in the entire Great Zhou dynasty, there were only a handful of people who could condense 4 spirit patterns and refine supreme grade spirit weapons, let alone 5 spirit patterns. If one were to say that spirit gathering relied on one's intuition over a long period of time, condensing 5 spirit patterns and refining a perfect spirit weapon would require a huge amount of luck. Luck, opportunity, state, timing, geography, people, environment, mentality. The perfect combination of all these factors was the only way to refine a perfect spirit weapon. Furthermore, this was something that could only be achieved at the peak of a weapon refinement master's standard. Bu Shuezhen's voice sounded once more. There are 6 steps to elixir refinement. The first step is material selection, which includes spirit herbs and elixir formulas. The elixir formulas for every type of elixir are different. In the sect, contribution points are required to exchange for elixir formulas. Outside, spirit stones are required to purchase them. Of course, the more precious the elixir formula, the more expensive it is. Even for grade 1 elixirs, there were many types of elixirs with different functions. There were essence-nurturing elixirs that consolidated one's foundation and spirit recovery elixirs that recovered spirit chi. For example, the most common and ordinary elixir such as the spirit-gathering elixir could help cultivators condense spirit chi better, and was relatively simple to refine. Among grade 1 elixirs, the foundation establishment elixir required the most complex types of herbs and was the most difficult to refine. As the name suggested, the foundation establishment elixir could help perfected chi refinement warriors cross the threshold of foundation establishment more easily. The difference between chi condensation and foundation establishment was a major realm, and was relatively difficult. With the help of the foundation establishment elixir, one could achieve twice the results with half the effort. Su Zimo listened attentively until Bu Shuezhen left. He sat on the spot for a long time and memorized everything he had learned today before standing up. Su Zimo arrived at the elixir pavilion, and used his contribution points to exchange for an elixir furnace, and an elixir formula for the spirit-gathering elixir before returning to his cave abode on Weapon Peak. Chapter 98. After returning to his cave abode, Su Zimo was not in a hurry to refine elixirs. Instead, he continued to digest what he had learned today, and noted down anything he had doubts about. After that, Su Zimo memorized the formula for the spirit-gathering elixir and the day passed. Night fell. According to his previous plan, Su Zimo should be lying on his stone bed and cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. But now that he could not continue cultivating the marrow cleansing section, Su Zimo could only enter a deep sleep according to the breathing and expiration methods of the first 3 sections of body tempering, tendons transformation and bone strengthening. Thankfully, he had just cultivated the marrow cleansing section and had not gotten used to it. The next morning, Su Zimo woke up early and started cultivating chi condensation. He took out spirit stones from his storage bag and gripped them in his palms to raise his cultivation realm. After reaching level 5 chi condensation, Su Zimo could clearly sense that his cultivation speed had slowed down. If he were to rely on spirit stones to absorb the spirit chi of heaven and earth, he would most likely only be able to reach level 8 chi condensation by the end of the year. After all, Su Zimo had to spend most of his time on elixir refinement and sword kinesis. In the blink of an eye, it was close to noon. Su Zimo left his cave abode once more and rode his sword towards Elixir Peak. Unexpectedly, the person who was teaching Elixir Peak today was the Peak Master of Elixir Peak, a white-haired youth. Compared to Bu Shuezhen, the white-haired youth's attainments in elixir refinement were much higher. When he was teaching, the white-haired youth's gaze would land on Su Zimo from time to time for some unknown reason. After listening for an hour, Su Zimo's doubts were resolved and his understanding of elixir refinement deepened. After the lecture, Su Zimo was about to leave when the white-haired youth called him back and waved. Su Zimo walked over hurriedly. "How was it? Did you understand?" The white-haired youth smiled with a warm attitude. Even though Elixir Peak's Peak Master looked like a youth, his tone was no different from an old man. It was clear that he had regained his youth. Yes, it's all right, Su Zimo nodded. What doubts do you have? Su Zimo pondered for a moment before asking. I've heard Senior Brother Bu say before that every medicine is poisonous to some extent. Unless it's a perfect pill, even if it's a top-grade pill, there will still be impurities. If a cultivator swallows pills, will it affect their cultivation? A look of admiration flashed through the brown-haired youth's eyes as he nodded. In the world of elixir refinement, the reason why an elixir with 40% of impurities is called an inferior-grade elixir is because over the long years, this is the conclusion of countless elixir refinement seniors. What we can be sure of is that as long as it's a graded elixir, even if it's an inferior-grade elixir, it's harmless to cultivators. Pausing for a moment, the brown-haired youth continued, however, there were once seniors of elixir refinement who mentioned that consuming too many elixirs would cause impurities to settle in one's body, and it would be difficult to purge them out. It would still affect one's cultivation. There are different opinions about this in the cultivation world because no one has found out what kind of effect it will have. Su Zimo nodded. The brown-haired youth patted Su Zimo on the shoulder and said, Go back and practice more. Elixir refinement is easier than weapon refinement and practice makes perfect. With your level 3 spirit fire as your foundation, you'll definitely be able to do it. If you have any doubts in the future, feel free to look for me. When he heard that, Su Zimo came to a realization. The reason why the brown-haired youth was the main speaker today was most likely because of him. Su Zimo's heart warmed as he nodded. The brown-haired youth handed Su Zimo a storage bag and said, There are many spirit herbs inside that should be enough for your elixir refinement. Take it. After a moment of hesitation, Su Zimo accepted the storage bag and bowed deeply. He returned to his cave abode. Su Zimo took out his elixir furnace and prepared to refine his first elixir. The 4 spirit materials were already arranged neatly on his body according to their classification. Su Zimo had already memorized the elixir recipe. The first step of elixir refinement material selection was over. The second step, refinement. As the name suggested, this step made use of the spirit fire to remove the impurities in the spirit herbs and extract their essence. Unlike weapon refinement, the higher the level of the spirit fire, the better the effects of refinement. Unlike spirit ores, spirit herbs were not as tough and had to be roasted continuously with blazing flames. Most of the spiritual plants and herbs were extremely weak, and the temperature they could withstand was different. If the temperature was slightly higher, the herbs would be reduced to ashes on the spot and could only be refined from scratch. If the temperature was slightly lower, the effects of refinement would not be achieved. This meant that the elixir refinement master had to practice continuously and memorize the temperature of flames suitable for the refinement of each spirit herb. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo picked up one of the spirit herbs and began to refine it. Swoosh! The moment the flames rose, the spirit herb was reduced to ashes instantly. When Ling Hu saw that from the side, he grinned with a mocking look in his eyes. Su Zimo glared at Ling Hu with a calm expression and picked up another spirit herb to try again. Failure, continue. Failure again, continue. Su Zimo's gaze was resolute and he was not discouraged as he continued to try and adjust the temperature of the flame. Finally, the spirit herb was reduced to a pinch of powdery essence under the calcination of the flames. Su Zimo placed the pinch of powder in a corner of the elixir furnace and continued to refine the next spirit herb. Yet another series of failures. After a long time, the second pile of powder essence was placed in the elixir furnace separately from the first one. A full 4 hours later, Su Zimo's forehead was covered in sweat and his spirit chi was almost depleted. Only then did he manage to refine the 4 spirit herbs and place them in the 4 regions of the elixir furnace. Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief. He was not in a hurry as he crossed his legs and began to recover his spirit chi. After a moment, Su Zimo stood up and began the third step of elixir refinement fusion. For this step, he had to fuse the 4 piles of powder essence together according to a certain ratio and order. This step was relatively simple as the ratio and order were clearly recorded in the formula for the spirit gathering elixir. However, if there was a slight difference in the ratio, the final quality of the elixir would be far different and there might even be situations where the elixir formation would fail. After fusing them together, He would proceed to the fourth step of elixir refinement, second refinement. This refinement was the most crucial step. If he failed, all his previous efforts would be wasted. The fusion of 4 different spirit herb essences would result in a huge change in structure and could withstand high temperatures. At this moment he had to use a ferocious fire. The advantage of a level 3 spirit fire was also revealed. Whether or not he could condense the elixir and refine a great elixir would depend on how much impurities he could remove by burning the spirit herb essences. The Scarlet level 3 spirit fire burned the elixir furnace continuously, and the powder essence within gradually turned into liquid. White gas began to seep out of the 9 small holes of the elixir furnace, and a faint medicinal fragrance spread out. If the level of the spirit fire was too low for this step, there was a high chance that a black mist would be released. Not only would there be no medicinal fragrance, there would even be a pungent smell. After a moment, the second refinement was over. The 5th step of elixir refinement, core formation. This was a step where he could not afford to be distracted or even be affected by the outside world. Otherwise, the core formation would definitely fail. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo maintained his composure and began to separate the liquid essence in the elixir furnace into 9 portions. Gathering them together, they gradually took shape and transformed into a solid elixir. Right then a change happened.